Prayer this morning will be offered by the delegate from Cecil County. He is not here.
He is not here.
All right. Prayer will be our good Rev from Baltimore County.
Good morning, Lord. Lord, it's me. Father, right now, I lift up this wonderful Maryland General Assembly into your throne room of grace. Father, I'm asking you to guide us. I'm asking you to direct us. Father, give us wisdom in our debates. Give us the serenity to understand one another's opinion. God, we give you the glory, asking you to help us and be with the Board of Estimates today. And thank you. And everybody says, amen.
Amen. Quorum call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. There being 114 members present, the House is now in session. The clerk will read the journal from the previous day.
Annapolis, Maryland, March the 2nd, 2022.
Recognizing the Deputy Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much be considered the reading of the journal.
So ordered, petitions, memorials, and other papers. Message from the Senate, consent calendar number 18, Senate bills introduced in the House. The clerk will read the, I forgot about him.
Senate Bill 31, Senator Sidnor, Judiciary.
Recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move that the reading of Senate Bill 31 be considered the reading of all the bills on the calendar.
Hearing no objections, the bills are read the first time, referred to the Appropriations Committee. Committee report on economic matters, report number 6. Clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 266, Private Passenger Motor Vehicle Liability Insurance, Enhanced Underinsured Motorist Coverage, Opt-out Option, favorable.
Question for the House is the adoption of the favorable report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The favorable report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 324, Minority Participation in the Alcoholic Beverages Industry Study, favorable.
Question for the House is the adoption of the favorable report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The favorable report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 917, Business Regulation Home Improvement Commission Award Limits, favorable.
Question for the House is the adoption of the favorable report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 924, Alcoholic Beverages Class 4 Limited Winery Licenses Extension, favorable.
Question for the House is the adoption of the favorable report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Report of the Committee on Economic Matters, report number 7. The clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 31, Maryland Energy Administration Resiliency Hub Grant Program and Fund, favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The amendment alters the, move so much to be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
The amendment alters the minimum operational term for a hub and alters verification and benefits requirements for certain contractors. Move the amendment.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye. Signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Question now is adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 108, Public Utilities, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Programs, Energy Performance Targets, and Low-Income Housing. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much to be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 adds the 2024 to 2026 Empower cycle to the bill, removes a prohibition on a particular type of insulation, and makes technical changes. Move the amendments.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment has been adopted. The question now is the adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 436, Motor Vehicle Insurance, Use of Credit History Rating Policy. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing the committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 replaces the original bill with a mechanism for an applicant or insured to request an auto rate adjustment or reclassification based on extraordinary events such as catastrophe, illness, job loss, or other factors. It requires the insurance to report on the use of the adjustments. So please move the amendments.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment has been adopted. The question now is the adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 637, Insurance, Title Insurance Producers Annual Review. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing committee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 is technical. Please move the amendment.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Question now is adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 962, Commercial Law, Maryland Personal Information Protection Act Revisions. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Couldn't see. Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 strikes the definition of genetic test and alters the definition of personal information to include certain genetic information and alters the amount of time that delayed notification of a certain breach may be given in certain circumstances. Move the amendments.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment has been adopted. Question now is the adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 996, Corporations and Associations, Ratification of Defective Corporate Acts. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much be considered the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 adds and alters certain definitions, provides clarifying changes, and adds clarifying language. Move the amendments.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Question now is adoption of the favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 1253, Alcohol and Tobacco Commission clarifications. Favorable amendments. Amendment number 1.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Move so much reconsider the reading of the amendments.
So ordered.
As amended, House Bill 1253 authorizes the Executive Director of the ATC to enter into memoranda of understanding and cooperative arrangements with federal, state, and local governments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 clarifies the application of an existing alcohol awareness requirement. Move the amendments, Madam Speaker.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment has been adopted. Question now is the adoption of favorable report as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Favorable report is adopted. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 18. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 18, Maryland Paint Stewardship. Favorable report is amended and adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill we had last year, maybe the year before. It is a fee or a tax. I think Governor O'Malley told us they were the same thing on paint. And so while I think we all support recycling and reusing of paint, I just don't think that consumers today should be paying, because we're already doing this in Baltimore County. I think the floor leader said every county is currently recycling paint. So, Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Can you read it?
Amendment number 613922/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a pretty simple amendment. The paint stewardship program, as you may recall from yesterday's conversation here on the floor, is going to put, about 75 cents per gallon of paint fee on paint. And I think that it would be wonderful if we could take the sales tax off of paint. So we took the sales tax last week off of diapers and toothbrushes and thermometers and blood pressure cuffs and diabetes equipment. And that's really wonderful that we really looked at some folks and gave some tax relief. But this would be a wonderful tax relief to people across our state, whether they own a home or rent a home, to do home improvements. I think after 2 years of COVID, everybody spent way too much time in their house, and people are painting, and if you've gone out lately to buy paint, I think you know how expensive paint is. So actually, my husband and I went out to buy paint for our house this weekend, and we spent about $1,000 to buy paint to paint our entire house. It was 25 gallons of paint, roughly, and so this bill would have cost us $18.75 in a fee on our paint to paint our house. And so this sales tax on that would have been about $60. So it's really a great offset on cost to consumers to be able to freshen their house up, paint your house inside, outside. And so I hope that you all will support this amendment, and let's give everybody a break and relieve the sales tax on paint across our great state. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing the amendment. Just read through it. Thank you again, but I'm going to ask the body to resist the amendment. Sales tax is managed in the Ways and Means Committee, and if the delegate wants to pursue this next year, I'm sure the committee will be happy to take up and evaluate this, but I'm going to ask the body to resist this amendment. Thank you so much.
Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title?
Madam Speaker, I press my amendment. I ask the body to, while
have not brought a bill to Ways and Means. I'm not on that committee. And there is nothing stopping us from doing the right thing. Let's do the right thing on the floor here today and give all people across our great state a break and knock off the sales tax on paint. So I would press my amendment, Madam Speaker.
Floor leader.
I would press the body to reject the amendment. Thank you so much.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded the vote? Does anyone care to change your vote? Clerk will take the call. Amendment fails.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the gentleman from Culver.
From Culver County. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also have a question or two for the floor leader, if I may.
Floor leader.
Yes, Delegate.
How are you doing this rainy morning?
Happy Wednesday to you.
So my question is for the Maryland Paint Stewardship Program. There's a drop-off point for the unused paint that you want to dispose of, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And there's a fee?
No, sir. There's not a fee to drop off the paint.
Okay. And what is the concern here that you're trying to, what is the problem that you're solving?
Paint that is usable that ends up in the waste stream.
So it ends up in the what? I apologize.
Waste stream. It ends up in the
Like-
incinerator. It ends up in the trash, but it's always paint that is usable that can be reused.
So your concern then is that paint is ending up in a landfill, right?
The concern is that paint that can be used is thrown away, kind of like food waste.
Sure. So the paint, in other words, if it were thrown away and you didn't have this program, what you're saying is that it would end up in a landfill, right?
Or an incinerator. And I want to, if you don't mind, can I point out
No,
something?
but I'm saying, but short of this bill, what you're saying is the paint could potentially end up in a landfill. Is that right?
Yep, or the
Okay,
incinerator.
thank
Yep.
you. That was perfect.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to know. Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk. My apologies for not sharing it. It literally just got in my inbox. I'm hoping that you guys have it up there. I did order it yesterday, right after session, and I know the amendment office is really overwhelmed, but hopefully you folks have it up there. It's amendment number 673327/1.
Amendment number 1.
Thank you so much. Be considered the movement of the amendment.
So
Excuse me.
ordered.
Thank you. Get my stuff out of here. So folks, we have before us House Bill 18, the Maryland Paint Stewardship Program, and the primary purpose of the program, as I understand it from the floor leader, is that there is a desire to make sure that paint doesn't find its way in a landfill. That is to say, unused paint that you have in a can doesn't find itself dripping in a landfill and seeping into the ground and filling up landfills. And so this amendment, ladies and gentlemen, extends this same concern that I've had for a long time with solar panels. Because you see, solar panels only last about 20 to 25 years. I mean, it's a decent amount of time. And then in Maryland, and I confirm this with the PSC and many others, in Maryland, after the solar panels are removed from rooftops or solar farms because they've outlived their useful life, guess where they end up? A landfill. Which means, by definition, it's not renewable. Because if it were, it would be recycled. If solar panels were indeed renewable, they would last forever and they would be recycled when they were no longer useful. But they aren't. They are not. They do not last forever, and they do not and are not required in Maryland to be recycled. So this amendment requires all solar panels in Maryland, when they are decommissioned, to be recycled. Just like the Maryland Paint Stewardship Program, which is what this bill does, this is the solar panel stewardship program. I'm a little tired of the virtue signaling of you gotta have renewable energy and it's renewable and solar panels are renewable, and actually they're not. They're not. And since we're doubling down on this legislature time and again on more and more solar panels and more free stuff to the folks who put solar panels up, like subsidies and so forth, and more tax credits, I think it's high time that we have a solar panel stewardship program. That's exactly, Madam Speaker, what this amendment does.
Madam Speaker.
And so for all those reasons, I would like to move this amendment. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Committee Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask the body to reject this amendment and all other amendments. Let me first address the issue.
You only can address one at a time.
Let me first address the issue of whether or not solar panels are recyclable. 99% of the elements in them are recyclable, but if you are concerned about this genuinely, then you or one of your colleagues should introduce a bill which we will very seriously consider, because if it is indeed true what you say, then that will come out in the public testimony and we can take action. But I would not recommend passing this amendment. Let's focus our mind on what this bill does. For many decades, I've heard my good friends who are more conservative than me argue that the business community should be allowed to clean up after itself. And guess what? That's what the paint industry is doing here. They've come to us with a proposal for recycling paint. We didn't have to force them to do that. They came to us to propose this to us. Now, I know people are going to have problems with the fee, which, by the way, is being assessed by an industry group, so they have an incentive to keep it as low as possible because they want to sell lots of paint. And I want to also remind everybody that this is a bill that's passed overwhelmingly in basically this form twice already. So I would recommend that we stick with the work product that we have produced for 2 years, now 3 years in a row, reject this amendment, and I will say, Madam Speaker, I will be very shocked if any person, liberal or Democrat, can craft an amendment that improves upon the sponsor's work over the last 3 years.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just for reference for everybody, we are going to conduct a study on recycling solar panels. So that will be done, and it is being taken up in other packages that are in economic matters at this time. So it really doesn't have anything to do with this bill. So I encourage the body to resist the amendment, and we will take this up in a different set of packages very seriously in the near future in an economic matters bill. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the gentleman from Cole.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do appreciate the comments from the Chairman of Environment and Transportation and the Vice Chairman of House Economic Matters Committee. So I just want to clarify something, because sometimes we hear misdirection, and I understand that that's part of the debate, but here is something that isn't misdirection, and that is solar panels are not required to be recycled in the state of Maryland, and they are not recycled. And the reason they are not recycled in Maryland is because this body does not want to require the solar companies, who tend to favor one side of the aisle, to actually recycle and be responsible for these panels when they reach the end of their useful life. When you think about it, and you look at a solar panel, it's a pretty complex, big piece of, glass with silicon in it and so forth. It would be, admittedly, very hard to recycle. But the purpose of this amendment is to make sure that these millions of solar panels in Maryland, which are reaching the end of their useful life, don't end up in landfills just like paint doesn't end up in landfills. And I just find it really fascinating that one side of the aisle thinks it's okay for millions of solar panels to end up in landfills, not requiring them to be recycled, but yet calling them renewable. It's nonsense. It's anti-science. And so, Madam Speaker, for all those reasons, I move the amendment. Thank you.
The question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose?
Roll call, Madam Speaker.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will call the roll. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 19. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 71, Manufactured Homes, Conversion to Real Property and Sale of Manufactured Housing Communities, Manufactured Housing Modernization Act. Favorable report is amended and adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question's been answered. I have no amendment.
Question for the House is the adoption of Okay, all right. All right. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 369, Marriage Records, Name Change. Favorable report is amended and adopted.
The maker of the motion, the gentleman from Culver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no further questions on this bill. Thank you.
Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 425, Public Safety, Untraceable Firearms. Favorable report adopted.
Recognizing the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have an amendment at the desk. It is Amendment 723121/1.
Amendment number 1.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So much be considered?
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
So the bill that we have before us has an interesting colloquial name. We all call it ghost guns. Ghost guns sounds much more interesting than untraceable firearms. Ghost guns may or may not be a problem, depending upon your perspective. It may be a problem that could be addressed in certain ways through this bill, or maybe it could be addressed in other ways, like cracking down on violence and handgun violence in general, in terms of penalties. This amendment, if the will of the majority of the chamber is that we have to find ways to crack down upon individuals illegally using guns. Using a gun that has not been serialized, registered, traced. We don't know who has the gun. We don't know who owns the gun. We don't know if they're lawfully able to own the gun. If that is the position and the impetus of this bill, and I take it good faith that it is, then this amendment is of a piece with that theory. Because what this amendment does is something that, frankly, we've tried to do over and over and over again, and I cannot find or fathom for the life of me why this is not a bipartisan position. People in this chamber, Democrats and Republicans, care very much about gun violence. People in this chamber, Democrats and Republicans, are appalled at the statistics that we see. It is not simply from Baltimore City. Baltimore City has a terrible problem with violence, and their own residents pay the greatest burden of that. But it is a problem that extends throughout all corners of the state. And it is a problem that stems in some part from the fact that we are too soft on criminals. And so what this amendment does, if you're concerned about illegal guns, guns that aren't registered, guns that we don't know where they are, guns that should not be in the hands of the people whose hands they are in, you have to be concerned about the theft of guns. Because the theft of handguns is one of the leading causes of how illegal guns gets into the wrong hands. They're not in the hands of a lawful owner who has them, who exercises safety measures, who has them simply for sport shooting or to protect their family or their home. They get in the hands of someone who wants to use them to shoot a gang rival on the streets and maybe miss and hit someone, like happened at the Graduate Hotel a few miles from here last summer. They get into the hands of someone who wants to stick it in your face, in my face, in our spouse's, our kids' face, to steal from them. They get into the hands of people who want to use them to commit horrific, violent acts, and they're stolen. Because most of the people who want to do these things, unlike all of us in this room, they really don't have the ability, probably because they have maybe prior criminal convictions, they have other issues, they don't have the ability to go through our regulatory process to legally buy a handgun. They got to get it somehow, somewhere else. And what's one of the main ways they get it? Stealing it. Stealing it. But you will be hard-pressed. It's remarkable to know that the theft of a handgun, just one handgun, isn't even a felony in the state of Maryland. Because most handguns, some probably have a higher market value, but most handguns have a market value that is below our threshold for felony theft, which we have continually increased and increased over the years in an effort to not pick up shoplifters. You know, we don't want to pick up the low-level people and charge them with felony theft. These aren't shoplifters. These are people stealing a gun. In Baltimore County, within, I think, the last year or two, there was a theft at a gun store. I think 51 guns were stolen. Now, that would be a felony, because clearly those guys came in and burgled, robbed, did whatever. They took 51 guns. That's a felony. Harford County, I think, had 13 guns stolen a year or two ago from a gun store. That would be a felony. But if someone just steals one gun in and of itself, that can't be charged as a felony. Those of us, and the committee chair is certainly probably one of the most experienced criminal practitioners in this room, so I'll take his word for it. But those of us exposed to the system know this. Sometimes you have to have a variety of charges within which to fit the criminal defendant so as to effectuate your goal of putting dangerous people behind bars. And so what this amendment does, very simply, a person convicted of theft of a firearm, including even an antique firearm or a replica, is guilty of a felony subject to a first conviction imprisonment not exceeding 5 years or a fine not exceeding $1,000 or both, and for a second or subsequent conviction imprisonment not exceeding 10 years or a fine not exceeding $2,500 or both. This isn't for having some drugs. This isn't for joyriding in a car. This isn't for shoplifting. This isn't for getting picked up on something that you can be easily rehabilitated from. If you want to stop gun violence, your ghost gun bill just ain't going to cut it. It's going to help, maybe, but it's not going to change the statistics. The latest statistics that I was able to lay my hands on suggest that Maryland, up through the year for the year 2016 and 17, had almost 16,000 stolen guns reported. 16,000 stolen guns in a tiny little state like ours. If you want to make that tougher, if you want to give prosecutors the chance and judges the chance to put people away who have illegal guns, have stolen guns, using guns for the wrong reasons, support the amendment. It's a bipartisan idea. It's the same mentality that this bill is about, and I hope that the body strongly considers it. Thank you.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleague, for bringing up a very important point here. The chamber should know that when you do steal a gun, it is technically under the public safety article as a property theft. But here's the thing, though. It's very rare in practice that that's the sole charge. You're normally charged with a slew of other things that go along with it. And I know our colleague is a practicing attorney, but he failed to mention Public Safety Article 5-144, which talks specifically about possession of a stolen firearm. It's a 5-year penalty. And again, that charges for every firearm in your possession that's stolen. So I would urge the chamber to resist this amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
All I would say in response to that, possession typically, in my experience, in most Maryland jurisdictions, gets turned over to a federal task force. A lot of jurisdictions, because the feds have very, very strict minimums, mandatory minimums for possession of illegal guns. And I guess my position is, we hear this so much, well, we don't really need this bill. We can do it through something else. Well, if you think that's true and we don't really need it and this is just simply gilding the lily, gild away. Take a vote, for some of you maybe the first time in the years you've been here, that says, I'm tough on crime. I know this may only apply 1 situation a year, 2 situations a year, 10 situations a year, 50, where a prosecutor is going to use this particular provision to put someone away who's in a possession of an illegal gun. Why not do it? So many times we are confronted with situations in this chamber where it's like, do we really need this bill? I mean, let's be honest here, folks. Do we really need 700-800 new pieces of legislation in a state of 6 million people every year? Probably not. It's a function of our own political desires as opposed to a need to do this for the good of everyone in the state. This is an amendment that gives you an opportunity to say, we're adding one more arrow to the quiver of prosecution, not about the things that you don't like being prosecuted. I understand that. How about the things that you do? Illegal guns. How about that? I urge the adoption of the amendment. We'll press the amendment, Madam Speaker.
Question. Gentleman from Talbot.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just feel the urge to invoke a couple comments about this, because this amendment's been around for a while. And in the past, it was sort of threatened or suggested that, well, if we're gonna do this, then we're gonna require background checks on all long gun transfers. Well, that's already been done. I mean, we're here pontificating about public safety, and it was just brought up by the floor leader. We don't want to identify the issue. The issue is gun crime, and the prosecutors and the judges, they don't want to identify it. This amendment identifies gun crime. That's stealing a gun. It's time we get serious about this and just not jump on the bandwagon for a political slogan. Thank you for bringing the amendment, and I urge everybody to vote for it.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our colleague is right. We've heard mandatory minimum bills every session that I've been here as a legislator, but they often don't make it to the floor, and that's because it's the decision of the committee that they don't progress. The committee has never heard any evidence that mandatory minimums work as a deterrent for gun crimes. Gun crimes are complicated. For every gun crime, there is a unique reason that drives someone to commit that crime, whether it be drug trafficking, whether it be intimate partner, domestic violence. There's a whole slew of reasons. And so the idea of mandatory minimums is really, it's an antique, it's a relic, it's a dinosaur of an idea. I think we've all seen Jurassic Park, and we know what happens when you try to resurrect a dinosaur. So let's keep it in the past and keep moving. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minority Leader.
The only thing I'll say in response to that, it is a relic. It's a relic of the 1960s, 1970s, when we didn't have as much crime, when people didn't get shot as much per capita in our state's largest city. Sometimes simply because things are old doesn't mean they're wrong, and because things are progressive doesn't mean they're right. Stealing a gun is wrong. It should be a felony. A felony. Period. I don't care if it's a mandatory minimum. It doesn't matter. You have to have penalties and enforce those penalties in order to deter someone from doing something wrong. And I will say that to my last breath in this chamber. I know that the people here have good hearts and good faith, and they want to believe that everyone can be a great person and everyone can be rehabilitated and everything can work out fine. And God, I wish that was the case. But there are people who cannot be rehabilitated, and there are people who must be deterred from committing horrific acts of violence. And if you're looking around the state of Maryland today, and a month ago, and 6 months ago, and a year ago, and you're not concerned about our rising level of violence and how it's affecting innocent people from Cumberland, Maryland, to Cambridge, Maryland, from West Baltimore to Rockville, Maryland, and every place in between, you're doing yourself and your constituents a disservice. This is a simple amendment. It's not going to change the world. It's just sending a message about gun crime. I move the amendment, Madam Speaker.
The question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Gentleman from Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I actually have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is 323-621.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much to read the amendment.
So ordered.
What this says is that on page 6, it strikes the word imprisonment and also strikes or both. So essentially what it does, this amendment removes the incarceration from the bill, and I'll explain. In this state, more specifically in my district, there are tens of thousands of people that for the last, 300 years have been able to acquire a firearm, a kit. Matter of fact, my father and I, we hunt every Thanksgiving, and he always reminds me that his first firearm was a kit that he ordered. They used to sell these things in Sears catalogs. It was very common. And I bring this up because there are endless generations of individuals in this state, more specifically in my district, that have always accessed kits for sportsmanship, hunting, what have you. This bill redefines the definition of a firearm. It incorporates language that says an unfinished frame or receiver is now a firearm. And the concern I have is that you have otherwise law-abiding citizens that have never committed a crime, that have never crossed a crosswalk without waiting for the light, that have done everything right their entire lives, and you can send them to jail for 3 years for owning a frame of a firearm. That's what this bill is. And that's concerning. The amendment's simple. It removes the incarceration. You want to find them, that's your prerogative, that's fine. But why are we sending these individuals to jail over a frame? And the last thing I'm going to say is this. I was so proud to stand with my colleagues, Republicans, Democrats, about a week ago, in a vigil in solidarity for the support of our friends across the sea in Ukraine. I was proud to listen to the speaker give a beautiful speech. In that country, they are calling on every man, woman, and child to stand up and bear arms to defend their country. They're being invaded. It's not rhetoric, that's what's going on. The president has actually signed an executive order releasing inmates to bear arms to defend their country. This bill would send people for getting a kit to jail. And look, we do have a constitutional amendment, the Second Amendment. You get it. I'm not going down there, but you understand. And so what this does is it removes the incarceration, because at the end of the day, people in this country have a right to the Second Amendment. They have a right to protect themselves, and God forbid they have a right to protect this country should something ever happen to us like it is in Ukraine. I move the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will, for the second time, remind my colleagues not to compare a ghost gun bill with the situation that's going on in Ukraine and Russia. So just to put that on the record. I am glad, however, Delegate, that you mentioned hobbyists, because trying to take care of those law-abiding hobbyists has been a central theme in the work on this bill for the past 4 years. And I think upon evaluating this legislation, you'll find that there is a very clear pathway for hobbyists to serialize their firearms. And it complies with what's going on with the ATF regulations that are due to take place as early as this April or perhaps this fall. So there's really not an issue there. It's serializing a firearm is a process that goes on every day in this state, so there's really nothing complicated about it. In terms of the specifics of your amendment and criminal penalties, we have a criminal penalty there of 2 years that was specifically asked by the Maryland State Police, because that enables them to do their job. If you are questioning someone about a civil violation, then you can't ask them to identify themselves. So that's a problem for law enforcement. Secondly, when it comes to criminal penalties, the 2 years is important because if you're sentenced to a charge carrying 2 years, then that prohibits you from owning a firearm in the future. And so if the goal of this bill is to make sure bad guys don't get illegal guns, then that provision is necessary.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I ask the floor leader to rise for a few questions?
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Good morning. So, in your comments, you had mentioned serializing these guns. I have a question for you. I understand during committee there was a lot of conversation about the ease in the process and FFLs doing this. Is that true?
Yes, that did come up as a topic of discussion, and Delegate, I think you would find comfort in the fact that I went about serializing a receiver myself just so I could be clear about the process.
And what was that process?
So if you have a constituent who is a hobbyist and they would like to know how to serialize a firearm, the first thing I would recommend you doing is asking them if they know when it was made. If it was made before 1968, it's considered an antique, and according to the Gun Control Act of 1968, which is a federal law, they don't need to serialize it, right? If that gun was made after 1968, once this law is enacted, they're going to have to serialize it. So what you will tell them to do is to pack up their firearm in a way that is compliant with our transportation laws and find an FFL nearby that does engraving. Type 1 and Type 7 FFLs are enabled to do engraving by the classification of their license. So for me, where I live in Montgomery County, Rockville is the closest location to me, and that's my preferred gun shop. That's 15 minutes away. Another gun shop that does this work is about 30 minutes away, and they charge a little bit more, so I prefer to go to the guy in Rockville, right? Once you get to the gun shop, you're going to present your firearm on the display case or the counter, whatever it may be, and tell the FFL that you would like to federalize your firearm to the federal standard. This is a commonplace procedure. They will, at that point, take out a notepad, or if it's a more corporate place, they'll have like a little, tablet that might be printed out or something like that. And they will ask you a series of questions that are the same questions they will ask you in any gun shop in America. They will ask you for your first and last name. They will ask you for your city and state of residence. They will ask you for the make, the model name, and then the caliber and gauge of your firearm. In my case, I got an AR-10 serialized, so the caliber gauge would be .308, obviously.
Okay, so I think we have a fairly good understanding of the process. So
yeah.
A few minutes ago, we heard on the paint stewardship bill, the ease of this, maybe a paint drop-off place every 15 miles. Would it be reasonable to think that it would be similarly as accessible as an FFL every 15 or so miles for someone to have this process done?
Well, there are 760 about FFLs in the state. And because I knew this question would come up, I had the best chief of staff in Annapolis and the best intern in Annapolis call a number of gun shops across the state just to do some unscientific research. And by our calculations, about 15% of all of the major gun shops in the state do this work. So it shouldn't, in some rural areas, it might take more than 15 minutes, but it's a very commonplace practice that you could find on their websites. They do charge a reasonable fee for it.
So my finding was a little different. I think I found about 10 in the state that actually has the very expensive equipment and the ability to do it. So, Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 433825-1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this is simple. It asks the Maryland State Police to publish a list on its website for all FFLs that provide the serializing service to be included in that list. I should move the amendment, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've become familiar with the term unfunded mandate as a member of the Judiciary Committee. And so asking the Maryland State Police to take on this additional workload, I think, is really unnecessary. Secondly, I'm not exactly sure if the Maryland State databases sync up with having a list of FFLs. And so that's going to require a lot of work. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a simple Google search for your constituents will yield the answers that they need.
Madam Speaker, I push the amendment. I feel a little different that the process is not as simple. And if it's a mandate you're putting on folks in Maryland that's been doing this for hundreds of years, I don't think it's much of a challenge for the state police to provide that information you're saying is so simple. So thank you. I ask you to move the amendment.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the floor leader rise for a quick question?
Yes.
Thank you. So I think there's been some misinformation on your part on what FFL dealers do in the state and who do and who don't and how it's done. Because I know that for a fact. So the vast majority of FFL dealers do not have the equipment, do not have the knowledge, do not have the software, do not have any information how to serialize a firearm. So explain to me, in your experience, when you went to an FFL dealer, which I think they're maybe 1 in 1,000, how did they come up with the serial number? Where did they get the database? And if I go to the same day to a different FFL dealer, how to come up with that serial number that's going to be different from one gun to another?
Sure, Delegate. Well, it's important to note that there is no government entity that provides serial numbers for anything. The government regulates serial numbers, but they don't ever provide them. That would be a huge database with a lot of costs. We don't do that, right? So serial numbers for a firearm are the same, are kind of the same as a VIN number, right? A VIN number is unique to a maker of a vehicle, but it's not unique in the entire world. The same thing works with serial numbers on a firearm. Police use that number to track that firearm within their database, but there's a series of other things, ballistics involving bullets that are found in shell casing that allow them to trace things. So to your specific point about where a serial number comes from for a privately made firearm, when you go to an FFL, they'll ask you, do you have a serial number in mind? If you have, say, some numbers that are sentimental to you, like if you're trying to play lottery numbers of, your kids' birthdays or something like that, you can serialize that firearm with those numbers as long as they are unique between your privately made firearms, right? Perhaps you're a romantic and you want to get your wedding anniversary engraved on your assault rifle, all right? You can do that, all right?
I got your point, but so what if two people use the same serial number? Because serial numbers is unique to that particular weapon.
It does not matter if two
It
firearms...
matters because the manufacturer is the one that actually decide on the serial number. It's not the FFL dealer, and they're not trained
for a factory
to do that.
traditionally made firearm, yes, the manufacturer would come up with the serial number. But if you, as an individual hobbyist, are the manufacturer, then you can come up with your own serial number as long as every firearm you have made has a unique serial number. So you can't engrave DEL for EVA 123 on all of your firearms, right? They have to be unique.
Right, but what if somebody else uses the same the same serial number?
It
You gotta
doesn't-
have some
it
sort
doesn't
of a
matter
software. It matters because if you have two people in two different states having the same gun with similar serial numbers, it creates a problem. So there's a chain of custody when it comes to firearms. So when you buy a firearm, I don't know if you said you bought one or you, so.
Yeah. Delegate, I think that you're not quite understanding how this works, right? There's a number of things that go into serializing a firearm outside of just the number. There's the name of the manufacturer or importer. There is, if it's a domestic manufacturer, it's the city and state that the company operates out of. If it's an importer, it's the city and country, right? There's a lot of other things that go along with it outside of just a number. It is against federal law for there to be a database of serial numbers of firearms that are not connected to criminal activity. So what you're suggesting is that there's some type of federal registry of serial numbers, and that simply does not exist.
Again, I think you're missing the point because you're not buying or bringing something it has a manufacturer name. You're bringing a receiver that doesn't have a manufacturer name. You're just serializing it. So you can find out the chain of custody, where it went, who bought it, where it is, and then.
Delegate, I'll put it this way, right? There are many people in the world named, Vaughn, right? Several people in the world named Vaughn, right? But to his parents, they only have one son with that name. So if you are the hobbyist and you're making many firearms, every single firearm has to have a different number. It does not have to have a number that is unique to the world. It's just within the firearms that you have made that are unique.
I disagree. I think if you really want to trace a gun to find out if it's been involved in a crime, you have to have a unique serial number that's specific to that gun. So let me ask you another question. So when you...
Well, you can disagree with me, that's federal law, so that's an issue for Congress
I'm an
and not for
FFL
this
dealer, so I
discussion.
know a lot about this, and I'm not trained. I don't do transfers. I don't do any of serialized. I think, obviously, whoever came up with this idea lives in a dream world because that doesn't happen in the vast majority of the FFLs in the state of Maryland. So when you do serialize it, do you have to do anything else, or you just they stamp it, and they leave? Where does the database go after that?
So, yeah, you raise a very good point, Delegate. So once this bill is enacted, the FFL will engrave the information that you've given, including your unique serial number that you have provided or have agreed upon with the FFL, and then they will take it to the part of the shop where they engrave the firearm. In addition to the information you have already talked about, the FFL will engrave their license number, and then they will mark this transaction down in their A&D log, acquisitions and depositions, which is something they do probably 100 times every day. And then...
So they have to engrave their FFL on the firearm itself?
Yes, and then keep it compliant with record-keeping standards in the state.
The numbers change every time you renew your license. Your FFL number changes. So what happens? You got to go back and change it every time?
I don't think it's a default situation where the numbers change. I think you can keep the same number if you like.
The numbers do change.
That may be your opinion, but
it's a fact.
From my extensive research in this area, I think your FFL number can stay the same if you request it.
No, I've renewed mine multiple times and it changes every time because it's based on the year that the license is.
Best of luck to you.
Oh, just me okay. All right, well, thank you, Madam Speaker, but I do support this amendment. I think it's common sense. If you want to make something safe, at least have the right process to make sure that your bill is actually serving the purposes it intended to. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the floor leader please rise for a couple questions?
Floor leader.
Yes.
Hey, good morning. I'm listening to the debate here back and forth, and something caught my eye, and I guess maybe I didn't understand the legislation. So are you saying you can self-identify a serial number?
Yes.
So let me run through this practical scenario. Let's say I have a gun that was manufactured for whatever reason, let's say target shooting. It has no serial number because it was custom built. So I take that gun to an FFL, and they're going to put a serial number on that gun that I decide with their tag number of their license. Is that correct?
Yes, that is exactly what I did 2 weeks ago in Rockville. And
Okay.
I'm happy to show you a picture of my receiver if you just don't take my word for it.
Awesome. So the logical question with the debate that we just had on stolen firearms, what's stopping a criminal from taking a firearm that was stolen, cutting the number off of it, and taking it to an FFL dealer to get it renumbered in the self-identified number on their gun? What's stopping that?
So you think someone who has stolen a firearm is going to alert an FFL to it and then have that FFL violate the law, endangering their livelihood and their license?
I'm telling you that if you
I'm
take
trying to understand this hypothetical because I've
telling
never
you the
heard
hypothetical
this ever.
scenario. Just listen to what I'm saying. You have in possession of a stolen firearm that had the numbers grinded off of it. Nobody knows where it came from. It was previously stolen, and it has the numbers taking off of it. You take that to an FFL. Why wouldn't they be required to relicense it at that point? If I just walked up and said, yeah, this was an older gun, I built it myself, why wouldn't they relicense it? To me, this seems like almost a way to cleaning stolen guns.
Delegate, I can tell you that we have received extensive testimony from the law enforcement community that says otherwise, and that this is the tool that they need to help do exactly what you're.
But you didn't tell me why my scenario was wrong.
Because your scenario is outlandish.
How's it outlandish? You actually think that somebody that would steal a gun might not cut the serial number off of it?
I don't think that they would go to an FFL with that because FFLs are regulated.
If you're trafficking guns and you have 5, 10, 50 guns, and you want to make those guns all of a sudden legal firearms, you just set up a perfect scenario to do that.
Well, Delegate, I think criminals are in some ways just like the rest of us. They want to do what's easiest, what's fastest, what's quickest, and what's going to get them in least amount of trouble. So, I mean, we can walk through the valley of the shadow of the hypothetical as much as you like, but ultimately, I just don't see this as a scenario that has ever occurred.
Oh, I'm sure it'll never occur. Why wouldn't? Okay. Madam Speaker, it seems like the amendment is quite reasonable. Now we punched holes all through this bill, and it looks like it's a way for criminals to actually clean guns more than it would ever stop firearms. I vote for the amendment or the body that wrote green. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Who came up first? Gentleman from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is actually a really interesting amendment. If you remember, there was a case a few years back. I just want to make an analogy about what we're doing in this bill. The gentleman from Frederick had a great point in his concerns about criminalizing ownership. That's the problem with this bill, is that if you own a gun, you're subject to a crime, the issuance of warrants, and in Montgomery County, the gentle lady's jurisdiction, the Florida's jurisdiction, there was a young man who was killed. There was a warrant that was issued. The facts of the warrant were not correct. The warrant was based on, it questioned his ownership of a firearm that allegedly was illegal to own. The warrant was not accurate. It was not that firearm. He owned the firearm legally. These kind of laws make you subject to the issuance of warrants, which are dangerous, and he was killed in a no-knock warrant. So what this amendment does is it makes the enforcement authority simply provide a list of locations that a person can acquire these serialization services. It's not a very radical idea. So I'm not going to press a motion here, but I think the thing we should do is probably hold the bill and maybe take the amendment to the committee so we could talk about this, because frankly, I think it's a pretty good idea that's going to allow people to get out from under this problem. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the floor leader please rise for two questions, please?
Floor leader.
Yes, sir.
If a gun owner makes a weapon, it's a kit gun or whatever, can they put a serial number on it and then register it with the FFL?
They can, and that's exactly the pathway that this bill, as enacted, would create.
So they don't have to physically take the gun there, they could do it themselves. I just want to be clear of that.
No, you would have to go to an FFL, so they would engrave their license number on it and then put it in their A&D log. Those are requirements in the bill.
So there's going to be an additional cost for that also, correct?
It's not specific in the language of the bill that FFLs can charge a reasonable fee, but FFLs charge reasonable fees for this every day. I personally paid $45 for mine.
Right. My second question is, if a weapon is exempt, it's been built before 1968, how do you prove if a gun's been built before 1968 if it's been, built from a kit?
Gotcha. Well, there's some standard criteria for an antique firearm. It's also important to know that if you have, say, like a musket, a single shooter type of firearm that was made in 1969, or it's like a replica of a pre-1968 antique firearm, then that would qualify as well. You don't have to get that serialized because that is under the Gun Control Act of 1968 also considered an antique.
Right. What about a professional shooter that's actually built his weapon and built it before 1968? If he gets caught carrying that, how does he prove that this professional weapon that he built for target practice or whatever competition he does, how does he prove that he built that in 1968?
Gotcha. Well,
Before 1968, pardon me.
Sure. So in the past, several decades, there's been innovation with firearms that make it clear whether something has been built, something would comply with the 1968 Gun Control Act or not. So we have not received any testimony in the committee that that's going to be an issue.
Well, I do have some concerns with that because I'm not a gun expert, but I can just see that if someone has a gun and if it was built prior to 1968, how do you prove it? And that's what we're down here to do, is make laws that are enforceable, that are good laws. And I just see a lot of holes in this law, and that's why I'm standing up to ask these questions. Thank you for your answers.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Caroline, please stay on the amendment.
Actually, it's exactly what I want to do, Madam Speaker. I do have one question for the floor leader. If you could just repeat why you're urging the body to resist the amendment.
Gotcha. I think it's unnecessary. And it's an unfunded mandate for the Maryland State Police.
Okay, so it's an unfunded mandate. I'm going to read the amendment again, Madam Speaker. It says, the Maryland State Police shall publish a list on its website of a federally licensed firearms dealers in the state who provide serializing services for firearms. The floor leader talked about her intern, how wonderful he or she was, and I'm sure that's very much the case. Well, the intern surveyed many of these dealers throughout the state from their office. I would argue that this mandate is probably one of the least demanding mandates that we put on any agency in the state of Maryland. Heck, if we handed this thing over to the state police right now, they probably had this done by 5 o'clock tonight, honestly. So yeah, bring it back to the amendment. I mean, this is something that it should be easy for us to pass. I mean, if we're not going to pass this amendment, we're almost borderline being obtuse here. I mean, and insensitive to the concerns from the other side. I mean, honestly, I hope that we can do this. I mean, we're not going to pass it based on it being a mandate. This is not a serious mandate. Again, the department can knock this out in just a couple hours. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the minority leader.
Thank you. I just had a question, something that occurred to me from the floor leader in some of her responses to questions from other delegates. Did you indicate that it is against federal law to maintain a database of serialized or registered weapons that are not, have not been involved in a crime?
It has to be digital or electronic. There is a ban on a digital or electronic database.
Okay. So what type of a database are we creating if I own I couldn't make my own gun. If you gave me $1 million, I'd screw it up, believe me. But let's just assume that 10 years ago I was a gun enthusiast and I ordered one of these legal, lawful kits and I created a specialty weapon. It was a hobby and I made it. It was fine. It was legal. And now you pass a law that says my gun's not legal unless I go and I serialize it through this FFL dealer. What database exists for that?
There is no database.
So there is no database. So when I go and serialize it for an FFL dealer, my gun doesn't get logged in any type of database that now we can look at and say, well, this is how many ghost guns are out there and this is who owns them, and right?
At present, there is no database.
Right. So
Or-
at present, there is no database that will tell us who has these guns. And after your bill, there will be no database that tells us who has these guns, correct?
No, it's simply compliant with the rest of the like regulated firearms that are recorded in an A&D log. So there's not a database or a registry that's necessary if the firearm is engraved with the licensing number of the FFL who engraved it, as well as making sure that that FFL is adhering to record keeping standards where if perhaps that firearm was stolen, upon recovery, police could identify the chain of custody.
Right. You're tracking. That's the phrase. You're tracking the chain of custody, and the reason for that is to say the gun is used in the commission of a crime, and we can find out where the gun came from. Is that a fair reason for why we keep these logs? I think was the word you used.
Yes, I mean, wouldn't you want to have access to your property if it was stolen?
Sure, I would, but what I'm more concerned about, I guess, in response to some of the questions from my colleague from Anne Arundel County, I'm starting to lose significance as to what the point of the bill is if I can serialize the same gun with the same number, but you say that it's only the FFL number that will change?
I think you're really confused about this serialization
I'm
part,
confused about
right?
the purpose of this bill whatsoever. Yep.
Every firearm has to have a unique serial number based on its maker's inventory. So every Glock 17 that was manufactured by a Glock authorized company will have a unique serial number for the Glock inventory.
Yes, absolutely, because they're manufactured by one company that has to maintain and says this serial number is 0001, and the next one that rolls off the assembly line is 0002, et cetera, et cetera. But if I can make a gun, and you can make a gun, and somebody in Nevada can make a gun, in Michigan, and Minnesota, and every other place, and we can order the same kit, and they're not serializing them at the kit manufacturer, because that's not what the bill does. And if you're allowed to individually serialize them, and then we're not keeping it in a database, because we're not allowed to do that, I'm just at a loss. What we really want to do, I think, what some in the chamber really want, they want to ban ghost guns. But you can't because of the Second Amendment, because you lose the court case. And so as a result, what we're doing is creating something that seems like we're doing something. We're going to require someone to get it serialized. How in the world is this going to help prevent ghost guns from being used in crimes? I have to take it to an FFL dealer. I got to get a serial number on it. That's going to prevent me from using it. Or if I just ordered one anyway, I'm just not going to do it because I'm using it in a crime. How is this bill going to prevent criminals from using ghost guns to shoot people? That's my only question.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So while we've gone off on this long tangent about serial number confusions, I think the main crux of this bill has been lost, which is we are trying to disrupt the supply chain of illegal firearms in our state. So by banning any unserialized firearms, we are making sure that prohibited people do not get access to dangerous firearms, which is what we are seeing in jurisdictions large and small throughout the state. That is what that bill is about. The idea of serializing things through an FFL is really a way to make sure those law-abiding hobbyists that we hear about have a way to remain law-abiding people. At the end of serializing their FFL, their firearm to federal standards with the FFL licensing number, having that transition logged in an A&D log, which happens every single probably hour in this state, your law-abiding constituent can drive off with the peaceful, easy feeling of knowing that they are still law-abiding. If you want to get rid of that, then that's on you to evaluate, but that's really a way of making sure that those hobbyists are not made criminals overnight, which is a constant refrain in our committee.
Question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call.
Madam Speaker.
The amendment fails. Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was too late. I was going to actually try to bring some common sense before you called the vote, because I think we lost track of what the amendment really was intended to do. So I'm just going to yield the floor. Thank you.
Recognizing the gentleman from Talbot.
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is 425/383128/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. I've got an amendment at the desk. You've got the number. It should be on your laptops. This discussion has been going on for a while, and I've listened very closely, and I've spent some time trying to understand kind of what's going on, and I understand the proponents. I understand where this bill's coming from. We have a gun violence crisis that's going on in many communities, but it's been focused. A lot of the gun crime that's reported that's been focused comes out of Baltimore City, and I say that with a heavy heart. There's a difference in this issue in the state of Maryland, from my perspective, in that the concept of building your own firearm in some places is very foreign and very scary. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't calculate. In other places of the state, namely in my district, building your own firearm is not a foreign concept. It's not a scary concept. It's something that's been done, and it's not a new concept. It has existed for quite a while. And I would beg to guess that there are a lot of legal gun owners who have built their own firearms. These are legal gun owners. From the way this bill stands, and based off of the discussion, the general concept amongst legal gun owners is that if this bill passes, that they'll automatically be criminals because they won't be able to comply because what the bill does is not practical. In the valley of the hypothetical was said earlier. You know, people forget quickly gun trafficking. One of the biggest gun trafficking cases in our country's history was perpetrated by our own government. Does anybody remember that? These are sophisticated, complicated issues. So I thought long and hard about this bill. There's a lot of opposition to the bill, and rightfully so, because it does infringe on lawful gun ownership, which is articulated very clearly in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. But there is a problem. We do have a gun violence crisis. I think everybody agrees with that. So I've come up with this amendment, and it's based off of an amendment that's been offered before. And it's focused on one area, Baltimore City. It's not intended to target, it's intended to help. It would provide $10 million to create a special crime unit for firearm violence. That's what we're here for. That's what we're discussing. You know, we want to have a safe state. We want to have safe communities. And you would probably ask, well, what's Johnny Mounts from the Eastern Shore offering this up for Baltimore City? He ain't got no business there. Well, let me tell you, what happens in Baltimore happens everywhere else in the state of Maryland. Okay? We've got similar crimes that have become too commonplace in Baltimore, showing up in places on the Eastern Shore, and they're becoming very, very much too common. This is a serious amendment. It's filled with the best of intentions. And if the majority is intent on passing passing this law, which will infringe on Second Amendment rights, including this provision, this amendment will help address the overall issue, the problem, which is gun violence. Madam Speaker, I move the amendment and urge the members to vote in support. Thank you.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the Baltimore City delegation, but I do appreciate your interest in this bill. It is a complicated situation, a lot of ins and outs and what have you. And I'm wondering, in your research on this bill, how many members of the Baltimore City delegation did you speak to about this amendment?
None.
And did you speak to Commissioner Harrison?
No, I did not. I have not communicated with anyone about this amendment. This bill came up yesterday. There's some many issues associated with this bill. This proposal, to me, was a very reasonable and productive addition to what we're discussing today.
Well, Delegate, it sounds like you've got some work to do. So I would urge the chamber to resist this amendment.
Gentleman from Talbot.
I appreciate the floor leader bringing this point up, but oftentimes on the Eastern Shore, there are many members from other parts of the state that point at the Eastern Shore about what the Eastern Shore does wrong. Okay? There are bills that come up on a regular basis, and not everybody on the Eastern Shore is asked or checked. Gun violence, gun crime is a statewide crisis. Everyone is involved in this discussion, and this amendment is not intended, like I said, I bring it up with a heavy heart. It's not intended to be derogatory. It's supposed to be helpful. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. There being 88 votes in the affirmative, and in the negative, the amendment fails.
Madam Speaker,
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
I appreciate what the floor leader said, and I think most of us will wholeheartedly agree that this bill needs some work. And I think the amendment some of the amendments that were offered, they should be considered, especially if we're trying to make law-abiding citizens be able to serialize their handguns or their weapons that they want to buy or their firearms. And I think I'd like to make a motion to move this bill back to committee to reconsider some of the work, because we need to have a good product come out. And I think it's a good bill that we definitely need to work on, and I think we can come back with some of these amendments potentially that the committee can consider and vote on a better product.
Parliamentarian.
Madam Speaker, this motion and the member is out of order. He stood up after the call was already taken, so this is not the moment to motion a bill back to committee. So I request that we move forward.
So, Madam Parliamentarian, so when is the proper time to make the motion?
Well, when you stood up, if I got it correctly, we were taking the call, so I thought that you were explaining your vote. So
I was
now
not. It was already over. I was just thought the speaker was gonna say that it's order for third printing.
Okay,
So
well,
I can wait. I'll do it again if that's
well,
more
we
appropriate.
can address it now. Let's Madam Speaker, in that case, I rise to oppose the motion to send it back to committee and urge us to take a roll call on that motion.
You can take a motion on the recommit.
Roll call.
So, Madam Speaker, I want to speak on the motion. Look, we've uncovered some stuff about this bill that's really troublesome. I know the floor leader was doing her best to explain it, but this whole deal where you can re-serialize a firearm is a big deal. You know, we're sitting there talking about where you can self-claim your own firearm serial number. Look, we walk up to an FFL, they don't know if you made that gun, stole that gun. They know it's a block of plastic without a serial number. That's it. So give me a serial number. That's not real well thought out. This is opening more problems than it will ever fix. And just jamming this through seems to be more of a election year deal with moms demand action than it is about good, solid policy to combat many of the crime issues that we face. So I rise in support of this motion. I think we can do better work than what this finished product is before we send it over to the Senate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Talbot.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I want to follow up on that. You know, this chamber, we approved a bump stock issue years ago where the legislation said you could register your bump stock with the ATF. ATF had no idea about what Maryland was doing. They had no comment, they had no input, and there was no way to do it. I'm texting with an FFL while we're down here on the floor this morning debating this bill, and the FFL is telling me it's against the law for the FFL to put a serial number on a gun. There are so many questions, there's so many problems, and we're dealing with someone's fundamental constitutional right. I support this motion. Thank you.
The gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'd like to press this motion to send this bill back to committee for reconsideration.
On the motion to recommit, green vote sends the bill back to committee. A red vote, yes, you take care of it now. Clerk will take the call.
Madam Speaker?
Clerk will take the call. Motion fails. Any other additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered for third reading. Printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 20. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 226, Public Schools, Self-Contained Special Education Classroom, Use of Video Recording Devices. Favor report is amended, adopted.
Recognizing the member of the motion. Gentleman from Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there was a concern about parental involvement. I had a lengthy discussion with some of the individuals working on the committee, and I will not need to press the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions have been answered.
Any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered, printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 23. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 428, Election Law, Foreign Manufacturer of Election Systems, Notification and Termination of Contract. Favor report adopted.
Maker of the motion, gentleman from Culver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a couple of questions before I offer an amendment for the floor leader.
Floor leader.
Hello.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So my question is that it appears that currently a company that makes election systems has to be a company that is an American company. Is that correct?
They're required to notify the administrator if there is any foreign ownership interest in the company.
And then in addition to that, it looks like what this bill is doing, among other things, is it says that if there are components that go into the election equipment that are made overseas, in other words, the components, then the specific components of the election system that were manufactured outside the U.S., they have to be what?
So if any components are going to be manufactured outside the U.S., the provider has to notify the elections administrator. The administrator notifies a series of other state officials. That information is reviewed, and if there's a determination that it poses any risk, then the contract can be terminated.
Got it. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, I do have an amendment at the desk. It is amendment number 693721/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment, Madam
So
Speaker.
ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate the intent of the bill. I just want to make that perfectly clear first. This bill, House Bill 428, which does indeed close some loopholes, some loopholes about election equipment that we use here in the state when you go to vote. Basically, the bill says, hey, that equipment that you just scanned your ballot into, the person who makes that equipment, if you will, and sells it to the state of Maryland has to, if this bill were to pass, certify that any component in that equipment that is made outside the United States must be registered and certified and looked at very closely. Certainly that's an improvement to where we are today. So, Madam Speaker, this amendment is a very simple amendment because I think it really closes the loopholes that we see in equipment made overseas for our election machines. And the amendment simply says, look, every single component of the machines, including the machines themselves, must be made in the USA. Seems pretty straightforward. Look, guys, we are the world's oldest democracy. The idea that we're not making the machines and every component in the machines here in the United States is really silly. And I do honestly believe that all of us probably really do agree on this. It's a common sense amendment. Every component of an election machine must be made in America and by an American company. That's all this amendment does. It improves this bill, and also, more importantly than anything else, it really helps to restore confidence in our election system. That's a good thing. We all want that and need that. We want that and need that because we've heard folks over the years in different election cycles, some on the left who say something went wrong, and some on the right who said something went wrong. We have heard this. And here's an opportunity to finally, once and for all, fix this system in Maryland in such a way that every time someone goes to vote in person, that the machine, they can rest assured that the machine that they are using is one that was made in the USA, including all of its components, and that the machine was made by an American company. So, Madam Speaker, for all those reasons, I move this amendment. Thank you.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I'm going to urge you to resist this amendment, and to the maker of the amendment, I want to thank you. I truly believe that your intentions here are good. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I appreciate that Congress tried to do that in 2019 with the SAFE Act, and unfortunately, they weren't able to pass it. And, you know, I believe that every election in America should be conducted on machines made in America. Unfortunately, Maryland alone does not have the market share to require where only 3 major manufacturers of voting systems manufacture their parts. So I would love the opportunity to work with you in a bipartisan manner to address this with our congressional representatives and try to fix it at the federal level. But what we can do within our purview as the Maryland State Legislature has to be something that we can implement. And we cannot dictate where a limited universe of manufacturers make all of their parts. So this amendment could make our election system procurement more expensive. It could make it impossible, okay? What this bill does is strikes a balance. What we can control. It requires notification so that specific sets of facts can be evaluated, risk can be assessed, and appropriate steps can be taken. Again, colleagues, I appreciate the sentiment here, but urge you to resist this amendment. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Certainly appreciate the kind words. Here's the thing. The United States Constitution delegates the states to run elections. So it's a little odd that we would say, well, let's have a federal takeover of elections without a constitutional amendment. That's not going to happen. Just not. So what we can do as elected officials in Maryland is require that our machines are made in the USA and all the components in those machines are made in the USA. That's all this amendment does. It is a Made in America amendment. Makes perfect sense. Restores confidence in our election systems. Tells the people that we are listening, that we actually care, that we want to make things safer, that we want to make things more reliable, that we want to improve confidence. Now's the time to do this. If we pass this amendment, I can assure you there will be plenty of companies wanting to sell Maryland brand new machines, machines that are made in America, with all their components made in America. Plenty of companies will want to do that. Why wouldn't they? I mean, the contract that would be let, I'm sure would be worth probably tens of millions of dollars, if not more. But is that a price worth paying to improve election integrity? With the world's oldest democracy to say that now, once and for all, we're making machines in the United States of America for voting? That's a price worth paying. So, Madam Speaker, it's really this simple. A green vote for this amendment means you believe in a Made in America amendment for voting machines to restore confidence in our elections, and a red amendment means the opposite. Thank you.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, again, while I appreciate in concept and in theory what the maker of the amendment is saying, we have to deal with the practical reality of being able to procure voting systems and recognizing that Maryland does not control the market. This bill strikes the appropriate balance. This bill passed this chamber 129-0 last year. This amendment, while well-intentioned, is unnecessary. It is dangerous in providing a blanket prohibition, and I urge you to vote red. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Roll call, Madam Speaker.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read next bill. Special order calendar number 24.
House Bill 495, Education, Student Organized, Peaceful Demonstration, Student Discipline and Policy. Favorable report adopted.
Recognizing the maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment is 693124.
Amendment number 1.
Moves to be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you kindly. So, folks, what this amendment does, we discussed this bill a little bit yesterday, and I discussed it, a couple schools who had demonstrated for a particularly sensitive issue in my district, and one of those schools ended up losing one of their organizational periods. That was the response that the school administration had taken. What this amendment does, currently the bill prohibits any discipline, but this amendment adds the words retaliate against or deny an educational resource to. So we would expand the language of the bill to prevent against unjust discipline and also retaliation and the denial of educational resources. And I submitted this to the committee. I hope that we can accept this as a friendly amendment. And this morning, I hope we would think of the students in Dundalk who stood up for a very sensitive issue, and I would move the amendment.
Recognizing the subcommittee chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to say that I really appreciate the delegate's attention to students and their rights and his concern for them. I also appreciate that he let me see this amendment before we took it up here on the floor. Both great things for him to have done. I have read the amendment, and while the intent is good, the language is unclear. I'm afraid that if we adopt this amendment, the use of the word retaliate, which is not defined in the bill, and also the other part about educational resources being denied, these would all fall very easily under the category of discipline, and they're not allowed to do those. I think the language is simple enough and clear enough as it is, so I would urge the body to resist the amendment. Thank you.
Maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the spirit of the bill, to stand up for the students of Dundalk, I think the language as it stands is currently unclear. I think when anyone on this floor thinks about discipline or retaliation or the denial of educational resources, we think of some pretty distinct things. So I think this is really just a clarifying amendment. I think this could apply to any school in any place of the state, and I would move the amendment and stand up for the students of Dundalk.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Roll call, please.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered for printed for third reading. Clerk. Special order calendar number 25. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 542, State Retirement and Pension System Investment Committee, Use of Minority Business Enterprises, Diversity Among Asset Managers Act of 2022. Favor report is amended and adopted.
Gentleman from St. Mary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the bill sponsoring floor leader for letting me hold this bill and taking a look at it. And all my questions have been answered, so thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 26. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 713, Vehicle Laws, Horse Riding, Helmet Requirement for Minors. Favor report is amended and adopted.
Recognizing the gentleman from Anne Arundel, maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to take the body for a long ride on this one, so it'll be. And I don't want to belabor the. So this is a friendly amendment, and while I appreciate, I understand the intent of the bill, which in respect to safety, I think this bill missed a small aspect of the health aspect by sharing a helmet. There is zero evidence of injuries or anyone falling off a pony and getting injured. And as a parent, and I'm sure all the parents in this body, if they hear the word lice, they get terrified. And I think one of the leading problem with sharing helmets is swapping. Is wearing helmets is not wearing them when they're properly cleaned. School outbreaks have been traced to the use of sharing helmets, and some schools have to close for almost a couple days just to get them, fumigated. So, and also cleaning the helmet is not an easy task. It's not going to kill lice, and it's also expensive.
Gentlemen, have you offered your amendment?
Yes, I will in a second.
But can you do it? You got the roll. You got the
Sure.
order reversed.
So much be considered to reading the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you. Amendment number 593620/1.
Amendment number 1.
So as I was saying, sharing helmets is a costly. It's a costly expense for businesses, which is going to be passed down to the riders or to the kids. So what this amendment does, it just basically exclude pony rides that are offered at parties, fairs, and other events. It's a simple, friendly amendment, and I am hoping the body would consider that as such. Thank you.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I really want to thank the delegate for providing the amendment. We had some great substantive conversation. I would ask the body to resist this amendment, and the reason being is that when we talk about horses and ponies, but we'll talk about horses and then we'll talk about ponies. Horses, about 20% of the people that fall off of a horse sustain an injury, and of those are head injuries. 33% of those are actual concussions. When we talk about ponies, ponies are between 12 and 14 hands tall, which is about 5 feet, more or less. So if you have a child that falls off of a pony, and you're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old kids that don't have all their coordination yet, they're not all there, they're falling approximately 5 feet off of that pony. And so the idea of this bill is to protect children, is to protect minors from head injuries from riding horses, riding ponies. So if they're not wearing a helmet, then their chance of having a serious head injury or a concussion or worse, death, significantly rises just from the numbers that I mentioned. When you put all those pieces of the puzzle together, it just doesn't make sense to exclude them because they're some of the most vulnerable. On top of that, on a lot of the rides that you're discussing, they already have insurance. These businesses have insurance. And in a lot of those cases, in most of those cases, an insurance company requires those kids to wear helmets. And if they do not wear helmets, there is actually a waiver that must be signed in order to waive their rights for any future lawsuit should their child fall off of a pony ride and hit their head or become injured. So in many cases, they're already doing this. And I would submit to you that avoiding a head injury is paramount over any other discomfort of putting a helmet on, or the alleged concern with lice. I don't believe that's like a really big concern. So that's why I really do appreciate the maker of the amendments, but I would ask the body to resist the amendment for all the reasons that I stipulated.
Thank you, Doug. And I couldn't agree with you more. Safety is
The
number one.
gentleman, the maker of the motion.
On the amendment, just I want to point out to the body that those rides, they're guided rides. The kids are not just hopping on the ponies and just running around. They're actually guided and they go very slow. So with that, I press the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Recognize the gentlelady from Carroll.
Thank you. I spoke on this yesterday, and this amendment, this bill is very broad. This amendment at least narrows it some. I just think of the joy that my grandchildren had a couple of years ago at the Strawberry Festival at our local fire department, walking around guided by someone on a pony. Now, how in the heck, or a horse? The parent was there, standing there. Now we're going to have helmets. Where are the helmets going to come from? Is the guy that has the ponies going to have all these sizes of helmets for different kids? And my grandkids has to put on a helmet that 20 other kids have put on. I always say, what is the risk and what is the problem we're trying to solve? These are not kids that we're talking about running in races. We're talking about pony rides at carnivals, fairs. Some of these kids, it's their only chance they've ever gotten to ever sit on a pony. At some point, we've got to stop being the protectors of all. Our kids are not going to grow up in a bubble. Things happen. The next thing you know, we're going to not let them climb up on a sliding board or get on a swing. At some point, you've got to look at the data. What is the risk? Who's responsible? And if a parent doesn't think it's safe, someone guiding their child around at a carnival or a fair, on public property at a public event, which is many of these things, what are we good? What are we just going to keep our kids in a bubble forever? So I think it's a very good amendment. I think we've overreached many things with our children, and the important things that we really need to be focused on, we haven't really dealt with, like getting our kids back to school and learning how to read. But this is a very good amendment. I support it. It's common sense. Please don't take this away from our children, because I can see these ride operators, they're not going to show up if they got to have a series of helmets for every, they're volunteers letting you use the ponies anyway. They're bringing them there so a kid has a chance to get on a horse and walk around a circle. So this is, to me, is just a common sense amendment. Please support it. And folks, I know in this chamber, and you haven't been here as long as I have, you're going to vote against it because everybody has to vote against everything. I'm not sure why we even show up on the floor to have these discussions, because everybody's going to vote no. But I'm just trying to say, think about what we're doing here. This is simple. It's an amendment just to allow our kids to be able to continue to ride on a pony at a party, a fair, or other event in a public space. Nothing has been presented to show us there's any danger to this. And I implore you to use your independent thinking and vote green on this amendment. Thank you.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I would submit to you that this doesn't have anything to do with stopping your grandchildren or any other children from riding a pony, all it does is increase the level of safety when they do so. I would also submit to you that there's a little bit of an irony of the fire department doing this without wearing helmets when the fire department is really charged with protecting people in emergency situations. And thirdly, I would say that's wonderful that you had a great day with your grandchildren riding the ponies. I think that's wonderful, and I think everybody deserves that. It would be a much, much more horrible day in everybody's memory if your or some other grandchild fell off of that pony, hit their head, spent the entire day in the emergency room getting MRIs and CT scans to discuss whether there was a concussion, how bad the concussion was, or worse. So with that said, I would continue to ask the body to resist this amendment.
Speaker, may I follow up?
The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A second ago it was suggested that people are going to vote against this amendment because they have to. I'm going to vote against this amendment because I support the bill strongly, and I'll tell you why. I have a half-sister. Her name's Annette. When she was a young woman, she fell from a horse. She was in a coma for weeks. It set her education back. She had to start her higher education late. I had a student named Gabby who got a similar head injury, a concussion, was out of high school for a year, delayed her high school. There are some studies out there that suggest that the rates of head injuries from horseback riding and pony riding are higher than those in football and rugby if you're not wearing protective equipment. So this is a common sense thing. We don't want children getting traumatic brain injuries. This bill will save lives. It will save kids from having delayed education. It will prevent eminently preventable injuries for children across the state of Maryland. So I oppose this amendment for those reasons.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Maker of the motion.
That was not
The
me.
amendment, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't make the amendment, but I'd like to speak if you don't mind, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, we're voting on this amendment, and I know we hear these stories about people falling off horses. This is not about horses. This is about a pony ride offered at a party, fair, or other event, which in my experience has been guided by someone around with the parents standing there and not making them have to wear a helmet because they don't have one, and someone would then have to provide one, which makes it probably that they're not going to do this anymore. I would like to say that I don't hear of any statistics about people falling off ponies. If you maybe look at moon bounce and other things that they offer at these same carnivals, I would bet you, I don't have any statistics on it, there's more harm in jumping around in a moon bounce and hitting your head than anything else. And please don't make it a bill for next year. I won't be here to fight against that. But there's risk in everything we do. There's risk in kids taking a bath in their home bathtub. And at some point, we can't fix all of that. Parents have the choice today whether or not to put a helmet on their child when they're on a pony ride if they feel so fit. But right now, you take this away, and these pony rides, I think, are going to go away because the free ponies that they offer, they're not going to come with a bunch of helmets for all these kids that fit all these different children that show up that've never been on the back of a pony. And I can't believe we're spending all this time on this discussion. This is a simple amendment that will make this a little more careful for our youngest children, that they could still participate in these rides, and I support the amendment.
Floor Leader.
They already do. In most cases, these pony rides already wear helmets. It's an insurance issue. You don't want a child falling off of a pony and getting an injury and then suing the company. So in most cases, they already do. This is just about protecting little kids. I don't understand the issue, why this is such a big issue. I think we should just protect our kids. That's it. I ask the body again for the third time to resist the amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Non-general not supported. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 27. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 740, State Retirement and Pension System, Investment Climate Risk, Fiduciary Duties.
Recognizing the gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 323124, amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1.
Before I introduce this amendment.
So must be considered.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you. Before I offer the amendment, can the floor leader just stand for a few questions?
Certainly.
Floor leader.
First of all, thank you very much for letting me special order this a couple times yesterday.
No problem.
Can you tell me, I looked at this bill, yesterday was the first time I saw it, and I started to look at the fiscal note. Can you tell me what an ESG program is?
Oh, I have to look at that real quick. No one called you? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And environment, social, and governance.
Yes, thank you. I bring that up because I've read around a lot about this recently, and it's something that's being pushed by both the Biden administration and many state legislators. Do you know what their primary goal is in an ESG program and in their investing?
Yes. So as you know, there's fiduciary responsibilities that any type of pension or retirement system has, but they also have to relate their fiduciary duty to the free market, right? And as we know, climate change is impacting the free market. There's a reason why there's a proliferation and growth in electric vehicles. There's a reason why there's new technologies to produce cleaner air, things like that. So in order to ensure that the investments are sound for the beneficiaries and the participants, you do have to look at the impacts of the environment and of climate specifically.
Right, so more climate than financial or returns, correct?
No, they're related.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your answers. Madam Speaker, what this bill, or what this amendment does, it prohibits us from divesting from domestic oil and natural gas production solely on the basis of investment climate risk. So I started to study these ESGs and what their goal is, and it might be applaudable for those that think that it's going to solve the climate crisis. And they can invest in these ESGs privately through KPMG. This is a huge push federally. Maine just passed this exact bill last year. New York's looking at doing it, Oregon's looking at doing it, Vermont's looking at doing it, and so is Virginia. What these plans do is they divest from our traditional energy sources through pensions. And then what the federal government's trying to do is shut down businesses that still commit to doing business with what they deem to be businesses that involve some of their investments with traditional fossil fuels. The problem with it is this: we're talking about pensions, not 401ks. The public sector is probably the only ones left with pensions, and the reason are they're unsustainable. The only way that we can meet that guarantee to our retirees that we're going to pay their pensions the rest of their lives, and we all know we have an aging population. We have a growing retirement population. This pension stress is going to be harder and harder to meet, but we have to do it. And the only way to do it is through sound investing, or we put it right back on the taxpayers' back. That's what this is going to result in, because the studies are now showing these ESG investments yield far less profitability than traditional investments. So I know some of the people in here feel like you just want to stick it to these industries and this will warm your heart. But I got to tell you, it will not warm the homes of the retirees, and it will not fill up the car with gas or electric. The idea that we're going to divorce ourselves from these traditional energy companies is delusional. Let's go battery powered, right? We need batteries to run all of these electric vehicles. And we also need the battery powered stations like they have in California right now. Well, guess what batteries run on? Lithium. Lithium ore mining. In California, They just did a study. Just to run the renewable-based grids, when combined with the solar and wind, it still requires them mining 500 tons of earth annually and requires 75 fossil fuel run tractor trailer loads daily to supply those grids. And it's coming out of one place, Thacker Pass in Nevada. Just got approved on February 25th. To Lithium Americas Corp. It's a Canadian-based and Chinese-backed company. So if you want to invest in them, you're investing in China. Let's go electric. Everybody talks about electric cars. Where's our electric come from? This is on the U.S. Energy website this morning. 20% of our electric is produced by renewable energies. 8.4% wind, 7.3% hydro, 2.3% solar, 1.4% biomass, 0.4% geothermal. 20% of our electric comes from nuclear, 19% from coal, 40% from natural gas. So this bill seeks to divest us from 60% of our energy sources. And if you add in nuclear, that's 80%. Maybe my good friend from Culver County knows what he's talking about when he says we should invest in nuclear. And I bring that up for one reason. What happened in the European Union just recently is amazing. You know what the European Union figured out? They proposed natural gas and nuclear energy to be counted as sustainable technologies so they could meet their climate change reduction goals. Listen, we pay a lot of these fiduciary and financial managers a lot of money because they know what they're doing. Because they're making decisions for every one of our retirees and for every pension. And they either have to do a good job or we got to put it back on the taxpayers' back. These decisions should not be made by politicians or self-appointed stakeholders, climate change activists, but leave it to the professionals. This would I applaud if this bill is about eliminating our need to rely on foreign dictators, thugs, and tyrants. Amen, I'm with you. But we got to be able to produce this energy here. Relying on other people for energy is dangerous. If you don't believe me, look at the front page of the Sun today. 2 million Ukrainian refugees because they're relying on a dictator, a thug, and a murderer. Let's not make that same mistake here in America. Here's all I want. I want us to invest in the American people, American innovation, and American freedom for our own safety and future. With that, Madam Speaker, I push this amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Before we take the last two special orders of the day, so far we have great debate. Let's keep it respectful as we take up these last two special order bills. Special order calendar number 28. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 937, Abortion Care Access Act. Favor report is amended and adopted.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the motion from the gentlelady from Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 793523-1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment is simple. I would like to eliminate the training program. Instead, we should use this funding to create the Premature Marylanders Hope Fellowship within the University of Maryland Medical System to expand the Neonatology Fellowship Program and provide monetary bonuses to graduates of this fellowship who spend at least 5 years practicing in underserved areas of Maryland. Why is this important? I'll tell you why this is important. It's personal to me. My niece, at 24 weeks pregnant, a young woman in her 20s, the very picture of health to look at her, was pregnant with her first child. At 24 weeks, and a little prior to that, she started having some terrible health issues. She was very lucky that where she lived and where doctors and hospitals that she had access to, Holy Cross, there were people there, doctors there, medical personnel there that could monitor her and watch her as she tried to carry her baby boy to term. She made it to 26 weeks. At 26 weeks, he was born. He was only 14 3/4 ounces. Look at the water bottles on your desk. These are almost 17 ounces. He wasn't even as big as these water bottles. As I said, she was healthy. So we thought, anything can happen during a pregnancy. We have a lot of women in here. We've all been through it, most of us. And I think it's important, if we are going to spend and allocate $3.5 million of taxpayer money, we should be doing it to help every woman. Every woman in the state of Maryland should have access to good medical care, to help them have support so that they can hopefully bring their babies into this world, that they can be cared for properly, and so that they can survive and thrive. I really hope that you'll think about that, because we are talking about taxpayer money. If you want to see his picture, my niece wrote a book about her experience. And I will say his name on this floor, Bryson. My nephew, Bryson Vollmeyer, is now a healthy, thriving 2-year-old. He is no longer on the preemie list. And again, it's personal to these families. These tiny people in utero are people. He was my nephew before he was born. He had a name. He was not a cluster of tissue. He was not a fetus. He was a baby boy. We have countless families across the state that could benefit from allocating $3.5 million a year to help save these babies and help these mothers and help these families be complete. So I please ask you to consider and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would very much like to thank the delegate for this amendment and for giving it to me in advance. I would really commend you on sharing your story and the story of your niece and her son. It is so important and so close to all of our hearts. So I will share with you that my sister was also born at 30 weeks, and it was really devastating for my parents to go through all of that. So it's something we feel very, very deeply in our hearts. I will say that I did a little bit of research on the program that your amendment is looking to fund, and that is, again, a really amazing program that is currently already fully funded with federal funds, and it is also sort of in contrast to what the bill is doing. The reason these funds are existing from the state is because we cannot fund that clinical training with federal funds. But the other thing is that unfortunately increased funding is not going to translate into increased care, because this fellowship program that you're looking to fund, it actually would have to go through the certificate of need process to get additional beds to expand the program, and we would also have to prove to the federal government that the need was there. And in fact, Thankfully, we don't think the need is there. We think that we have this program fully funded adequately. You mentioned the work done at Holy Cross. That's where my sister was as well. But we also know that most of the fellows who are already part of this program are working in underserved areas. So we think this program, while extraordinary, has what it needs. And we also think that the abortion care clinical training program is necessary because it doesn't have what it needs. We have a shortage of providers and we have no access to clinical training funding right now. So I would ask the body to resist this amendment, but truly honor the intentions of the sponsor of the amendment, because we all agree that premature babies need our help. So thank you very much. And I urge the body to resist the amendment.
Madam Speaker.
The maker of the motion.
And I appreciate your thoughts and words, and I appreciate hearing about the federal funds. I still press and I still say, if we're going to allocate $3.5 million of taxpayer money to something that half of Marylanders don't agree with, I would urge the body to put money towards saving babies' lives and helping mothers, and not the opposite. Thank you.
Recognizing the gentlelady from Baltimore City.
Thank you very much,
Chair
Madam Speaker.
Appropriations.
Let me just say in particular about this amendment, where you're on the floor, we have an amendment. It's to a bill that has a fiscal note, and we want to strip the fiscal note and put it into a different program. This isn't the place to do that, actually. I mean, we don't do that on the floor of the House of Delegates. There's a process that we go through, and it goes back through both the Appropriations Committee, Finance Committee, or the Policy Committee. I think we're going to have an emotional debate today about something, a topic that we all, I think, feel very deeply about. I think the floor leader's answer was spot on. That the program that this is trying to divert money to is a good program, an important program, and it is fully funded, specifically because it can receive federal funds. So the bill before you today, and specifically this particular amendment to the bill, I think is not appropriate. That we should move forward, have a very robust debate, but shifting monies from one thing to another on the floor of the House of Delegates without even the research that the floor leader has done is not what we should be doing. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Maker of the motion.
I appreciate the insight from the good delegate, Chairwoman. However, I still feel that while this federal funding might be available, it's clear that we don't have what we need throughout the state. And so hopefully we'll bring another bill back dealing with that. But I would still like to press my amendment because I still believe that taxpayer money should go towards saving babies. And I hope that you will join me in voting green. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Explain my vote, Madam Speaker.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No one, I think, probably in this room knows more about the intricacies of the budget process than my friend from Baltimore City, the chair of the committee. But all I will say about the issue raised is this. Where we spend our money is where our priorities lie. And every member, all 141 of us in this chamber, this is, for some of us, perhaps maybe the only opportunity in a meaningful way to attempt to express that with our dollars. It may not be the best, most strategic way to do an appropriations process, and I appreciate that, but the intent to spend our money where our priorities lie is the meaning of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay. Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker,
Gentleman from the Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 663627-1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this amendment is quite simple. I know we've heard that before. I thought my last one was a simple one, but we'll try again. So this here makes that a qualified provider may not perform an abortion on an unmarried minor unless the qualified provider first gives notice to a parent or guardian of the minor. And I'm sure when you hear that, many of you start thinking right away, well, that's crazy, the age of consent 16. And that's true. The age of consent is 16. But when we're talking about something that happens at 16, and when we're talking about something as serious as taking the life of an unborn that may be an 8-pound baby, boy or girl, whatever the case may be, it takes a lot more maturity and thought and consideration. And from testimony we've heard here so many times when we're talking about juvenile justice reform and how a minor's brain's not developed, and I really thought about putting the age at 26. So 18 I thought was a nice concession. But in all seriousness, it's a very serious consideration. And when we can involve the family and have a conversation, reaching out and maybe getting an offer of financial support or whatever it is, this is a decision that's going to be made that affects long-term the unborn. It's going to affect the person just making the decision as to whether or not to have this procedure. And it could affect the family. So I urge this body to support the amendment, and still in family decision-making can protect and guide children against making hurtful decisions. Madam Speaker, I ask you to move the amendment.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the delegate for getting this amendment to us in advance as well. I would urge the body to resist this amendment for the following reasons. We actually voted on this as a state in 1991. We codified the principles of our abortion law, and at that time, the voters in the state of Maryland affirmed that parental notice is the standard that we want here in Maryland. There are many, many reasons for that. The first being really fundamental, and I absolutely respect the opinions of the maker of the amendment and understand his commitment to family values. I share those, and I have 2 teenagers myself, so I completely understand where you're coming from. That being said, one cannot force their daughter to be pregnant against their will. You simply can't. And parental consent is what this amendment would turn our standard into in the state of Maryland. Parental consent is something that is opposed by all of the major medical organizations because it's bad policy. It's not right to put minors in that position, and the voters of Maryland agreed with that overwhelmingly, and that is why we've had parental notice as our standard in the state of Maryland for the last 30 years. It works. So I urge the body to resist this amendment. Thank you so much.
Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Hartford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a couple of questions for the floor leader.
Yes, sir.
Around this amendment. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Speaker. What are the requirements for notification for minors under the bill as written?
I'm sorry, the requirements?
Yes.
So we have an existing law in the state of Maryland that has been in place, again, for 30 years. They are required to notify the parent unless there are other, obviously we heard from the maker of the amendment, if they're married, they're not going to notify the parent. And then if the minor has health risk to the home, in the home, they don't need to notify. If the provider has determined that they are appropriate to make this clinical judgment for themselves, that they are mature enough to do so themselves.
So I'm sorry to make a cut you off. What provider makes that decision to not notify the parent? What provider, what expert makes that decision that someone's old enough and mature enough
to make that decision for themselves?
Sure. So the clinician, all of the state law that we have in Maryland really depends on the clinicians and their clinical judgment. I want to be clear though, because lots of us are parents in this room. I think it's important that you understand we have heard testimony, and it is clear that most minors who are coming for abortion care procedures are coming with a parent. We heard testimony in committee about 90%. It's a very small group of minors who are not. And under those circumstances, the parental notice is employed unless one of the reasons for the clinician are triggered, such as they think it might be a risk for them at home.
So is it a psychologist, an expert in the field, that makes a decision that this individual is mature enough, or is it an abortion provider?
It would be a reproductive health care provider that they were seeking. And they
So there's no medical expert who is an expert in the development of a child's brain making this decision?
It's the same type of medical expert that would be caring for the child throughout their pregnancy, which is a 9-month-long experience, which is, again, why I revert back to we can't force people to be pregnant against their will.
Sure, so somebody trained in how to provide abortion, but not necessarily an expert or a PhD in child psychology.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the, I just want to support the maker of the amendment and support this amendment. First of all, I definitely appreciate the majority party's effort and concessions on our concerns and trying to keep the temperature down, and I'm going to do my very best to honor that as well, but this is something that's very important to me and I feel very deeply about for a few reasons, especially this amendment. We've had a lot of bills over the last couple of years eroding parents' rights here in the state of Maryland. We had a bill last year to allow guidance counselors not to share information with parents as young as the age of 12. We have a bill this year that would, if a child gets molested in school, that the school does not have to report that to the parent. That's a bill we have this year, right? We have issues with transparency in schools and education. There is a lot of efforts right now, deliberate, not deliberate, unintended consequences, that are going after parental rights and the sacred relationship between a parent and their child, that frankly, the state has no business being involved in, right? And we talk a lot about in judiciary. I learned more about frontal lobes and brain development in judiciary than I ever imagined, right? And we talked about that constantly, about how we must allow children the opportunity to make mistakes at a young age. And they don't have the ability for themselves to make these complex and difficult decisions, even as severe as murder, right? So we must accommodate and create pathways to allow kids to be kids, right? Because they cannot make certain decisions. And sure, that goes for getting pregnant, right? Kids get pregnant at a young age, and that's real, right? But to terminate a baby in the womb is also real. And there's tons of studies that show that many people who've had abortions have had traumatic experiences. I was reading this morning the actual process of an abortion at different times during pregnancy. And it's horrifying. And even people that support abortion admit the process is horrifying. And for a child to go through this, right, or make a decision to go through this and deal with that trauma without parental involvement, I think is certainly very troublesome. I want to run through something very quickly, right? When we talk about the impacts of abortion, right? And we talk about the impacts of teenage abortion, right? I want to talk about two individuals that are great Americans. I don't always agree with them, but they're great Americans that had teenage mothers, right? First and foremost, Oprah Winfrey. And I reference her because she was in Baltimore, and she's a household name, and she's probably the only daytime talk host that I can stomach. No offense to anybody else. The other one, great American with a teenage mom, and Google's about to blow up. President Barack Obama had a teenage mother,
Both those individuals were born before 1972 when there's limited access to abortion. And here's a question, it's rhetorical. Would either one of those great Americans and great people be here if their mothers had easy access to abortion and abortion was normalized the way it is now when they were born? We don't know that. We don't know that. But the way we create ease of access, normalize abortion, and use terms like fetus to take away from baby to dehumanize the process certainly makes it much more likely. So I would urge this amendment for parental rights, for individuals who may not be ready to make these very challenging decisions on their own. Also because the people making this advice is not a trained professional. They're not an expert. They have no idea how to counsel somebody and to identify if they're mature enough. They do not. They're trained on how to perform an abortion. They're not trained to identify if someone's mature enough to have one. So all I'm going to say is, a lot of folks in this debate, and it's a fair argument, keep your hands off my body, right? I will urge this body to keep your hands off my kids. Thank you.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I ask a few questions for the floor leader?
Floor leader.
Thank you.
So when you were talking about minors, is that 16 to 18? Is that, can you kind of fill me in, walk me through on what you meant? And just to bring me some clarity, exactly what you mean by minor. Is that 13 to 18, 16 to 18?
So the age of consent in Maryland, as we heard before, is 16. We're talking about anyone under 18 when we discuss minors in our statute.
Okay. And you also talked about, and just for my clarity, you talked about the 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old and their healthcare provider making these decisions. Is there anything in statute that the healthcare provider has to consider? Is, they're making this decision based on safety at home. Is there a police report, or is this just based on a conversation with the individual and the healthcare provider?
So all healthcare providers are mandatory reporters. So if they suspect that there's abuse going on, they're going to be obligated to report that abuse, absolutely. So I hope that gets at your answer. I think maybe underneath your question is some concern that these providers are not appropriately clinically trained. So I just want to reiterate that every healthcare provider, every clinician in this bill, considered in this bill, is required to have behavioral health training, so they have expertise in this space, and unfortunately, not all parents do.
I understand, and really what I was trying to get at was if there was in statute any markers that the state demanded from these healthcare providers when making this decision. So thank you very much.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the gentlelady from Washington County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone. I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 603-822-1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, if you could bear with me for just a few minutes, I have some statistics and data here that I'd like to share. So I'll be reading off a few numbers. But let me first state what the amendment does. The department shall collect the following de-identified data regarding abortion performed in the state. For each abortion, the gestational age of the fetus at the time of the abortion, and the type of abortion performed, the total number of abortions performed, and the racial and economic demographics of the mothers. Again, de-identified information, no names, date of births, and no identifying of the mother. This information will be collected by July 1st of each year, beginning in 2023. Information and data will be reported to the governor based on each county and statewide. That's the gist of the amendment. So I'd like to share some data with you with a particular focus on African American women, women who look like me, and many of you in here today. In Maryland, African Americans make up about 30% of the population, and whites nearly double this number. So I'll share just a few counties and what those numbers look like representing blacks and African Americans. Charles County, 49.2%, St. Mary's County, 14.3%, Calvert, 13%, my county, Washington, 11.4%, Frederick, 10%, Prince George's, 59.8%, so on and so forth. African Americans are the minority in many of our counties across the state of Maryland when we compare ourselves to white counterparts, with the exception, of course, of Prince George's and Charles County. Maryland has over 6 million people who reside in our state. We have the fourth highest abortion rate of 23.4%, according to data from 2017. We have a total of nearly 30,000 abortions, almost 30% of pregnancies. The abortion rate is nearly 25%. Maryland now has a white population of 47% compared to 55% in 2010, according to the 2020 census. The state's black population remained at 29%. The Hispanic population rose from 8% in 2010 to 12% in 2020. African Americans are continuing to be the minority in the state of Maryland and in the nation. I'll get straight to the point. According to a policy report that was written in 2015, the leading consumer of abortion services are African American women. According to the 2011 abortion surveillance report issued by the CDC, black women make up about 14% of childbearing population, yet we obtained 36.2% of reported abortions. Black women have the highest abortion rate in the country, with 474 abortions per 1,000 live births. This is what startled me when I was doing some research. Percentages at these levels illustrate that more than 19 million black babies have been aborted since 1973. Almost 50 years were coming up. 19 million doctors, lawyers, teachers, delegates, senators, electricians, plumbers, so on and so forth. Black women are 5 times more likely to have an abortion than white women. A study released by Protecting Black Life and Outreach of Life Issues Institute concluded that 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are strategically located within walking distance of African and or Hispanic communities. This study coincides with historical revelations that eugenics dating to the mid-1900s argued that the most effective way that could advance their agenda would be to concentrate population control facilities within targeted communities. Those communities, poor black and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. I'm sure you know about Margaret Sanger. She was the founder of the American birth control movement. She was the lead spokesperson, and activist in promotion of controlling the birth rate among blacks and others she considered as genetically inferior. Me, my siblings, my brothers and sisters, my aunts and my uncles, my grandparents, we are genetically inferior. Sanger became the formidable force when pushing her Negro Project, designed to employ black leaders to promote first birth control and later abortions as viable options for family planning. I say to you, my colleagues, abortion is not health care. Sanger's organization continues to persuade others that Planned Parenthood is for the benefit of the black race. In a report entitled The Effects of Abortion in the Black Community, dated June of 2015, it stated that a high frequency of abortion within the black community inevitably creates far-reaching consequences, not only on the women who have obtained abortions, but also on the entire population. Recent census results reveal one such consequence, stating that African Americans have been surpassed by Hispanics as the largest minority group in the U.S. A George F. Jewett scholar at the American Enterprise stated, since the number of current living blacks in the U.S. is 31 million back in 2015, the missing 10 million represents an enormous loss. Without abortion, America's black community would now number 41 million people. It would be 35% larger than it is currently. Abortion has swept through the black community, cutting down every fourth member. Imagine if this room and all the chairs were filled and we counted off in fours. Every fourth person would not be here due to abortion. We could have more black senators, more black representatives, had it not been for abortion on the platform. Today, as a result of abortion, blacks have prevented themselves from gaining greater political opportunity. We are killing our race and stunning our population and our growth. Since the last census prior to 2020 and 2010, how many more black children would have been born had it not been for abortion? How many elementary boys and girls would be with us today? How many? Just imagine that. 12 years ago, since 2010. Hundreds of thousands? Maybe millions? We're talking about doctors, lawyers, firefighters, police officers, electricians, plumbers, business owners, stay-at-home moms and dads, fast food workers, mechanics, school administrators, computer technicians, scientists, so on and so forth. But because abortion is so readily accessible, we will never know the outcome of these babies. In state after state, similar numbers are found with black women aborting at 2 or 3 times more in their 2 or 3 more times their presence in the population. And that's at every income level. Black women have a higher rate of abortion than whites or Hispanics. Except at the poverty level, Hispanics tend to outrun black women. According to the data from the CDC, among the 30 areas that reported race by ethnicity for 2019, non-Hispanic white women and non-Hispanic black women accounted for the largest percentages of abortions, 33.4% and 38.4% respectively. 34% of pregnancies in black women end in induced abortion, compared to 11% for white women. Less than half of pregnancies in black women result in the birth of a live baby, 48%. Induced abortion is 3.7 times more common in black than in non-Hispanic women. It is known that the risk of death from induced abortion increases by 38% for every week after 8 weeks gestation. Simply stated, abortive procedures have a statistically greater impact of minority populations, according to the American Association of Profile Obstetricians and Gynecologists. The abortion industry often claims it's been proven that women do not regret or grieve their abortions. But this is highly false. Many women do, over time, feel grief and regret. Many of them grieve the children that they lost. A decision made in desperation has led to a lifetime of pain for many, many women. Trust me when I say, this is a pain that will never go away. I'll bring it to close, colleagues. This amendment is necessary to find out why are women, black women, ranking the highest at abortions? Is it socioeconomically? Is it being single, not married? What is the problem? We are the least represented in population, but we rank the highest in abortions. We must explore the data to better understand why African American women are in these data. We say often we care for Black lives. These data will allow us to collect, analyze, and interpret information regarding abortions. Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Recognizing gentlelady. Recognizing the gentlelady from Prince George's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I urge you to resist this amendment. I do appreciate my colleagues' remarks with regards to abortions within the African American community. Not 100% certain where she received her numbers from, because according to my numbers from the CDC, 39% of white women receive an abortion, 25% are African American, and 25% are roughly Hispanic. But that being said, the amendment that is before this body actually does not really benefit the African American community. And I welcome my colleague to have a further conversation about healthcare within the African American community, especially healthcare for women in the African American community, and why, for whatever reason, African American women have the highest rate as it relates to maternal mortality, actually 4 times higher here in the state of Maryland than across the country. And so I welcome a conversation to discuss why we have these issues. And I will say partially the reason may be is because of lack of access to care. And that's what this bill is about. This bill is about access to care in all communities across our state, including the African American community across our state. So I appreciate the amendment to try to collect more data. However, it's been shown that other states that have these type of reporting systems actually have been subverted and cause people to stigmatize abortion care, harass providers, harass patients, and advance a certain type of agenda. But today is about public health, and that is the agenda that we should be promoting today here on this floor, is public health. A reporting requirement will intimidate patients and providers are afraid. In fact, a lot of providers have seen an increase in death threats and threats to harm over the last several years. Patients who are seeking abortion care have seen a 125% increase in assault and battery outside of clinics. Data collection has a chilling effect in accessing care and has been used in other states to impede care and deter women from seeking the care that they so desire. Care that is needed so much in the African American community. When we know we have disparities, in care. And so what this bill does, this bill that is before you, will allow the training of more providers for our communities, training that will provide them with the tools that they need. We need to take steps to encourage and provide this greater access, and this amendment does not do that, unfortunately. This amendment will prevent people from wanting to seek the care that they need because they're going to be afraid that they're going to be outed. And that is not the purpose of this bill. And so I encourage my colleagues to resist this amendment and that allow people to trust their healthcare provider to provide the care that they need. Thank you.
On the amendment, all
Madam
in
Speaker.
favor signify
Madam
by
Speaker.
saying aye. Opposed? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to explain my vote.
Gentleman may explain his vote.
It's interesting that our colleague brings up the CDC because Maryland's one of 3 states that fails to report any information to the CDC. So what are we afraid of? What are we hiding? We talk about access to care, but yet there's been no decline in the number of abortions in Maryland that we have recorded through Medicare and Medicaid. In 2021, we know there were 10,163 abortions, 9,900 in the year prior. And going back to 2017, there were 8,900. So the number consistently goes up. If there's a problem with access to care, I would think that number would likely decline. But again, we don't report to CDC because we're afraid to report those numbers to the CDC. So if we really want to know information to make an informed decision, let's start reporting information to the CDC like the other 47 states do. Thank you.
Clerk will take the call. Amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from Anne Arundel.
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 733129.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, the Maryland House of Delegates will vote to enshrine late-term abortion into the Maryland Constitution. My amendment will prohibit abortion after 24 weeks gestation unless there is a threat to the life of the mother. 24 weeks gestation is 6 months. A baby has lived in its mother's womb for 6 months, growing and thriving. The mother is 2/3 of the way through her pregnancy. At this point, baby's face is formed and he looks like his parents. Baby has eyelashes, eyebrows, and hair on her sweet head. Baby can hear her parents' voices and will be able to recognize them at birth. Baby can also be startled by loud noises, such as dogs barking, honking horns, and fire truck sirens. The government has a clear and compelling interest in preventing murder. We do it every day. The medical procedure to abort a baby after 24 weeks includes injecting drugs into the baby to kill her and stop her heart from beating. Then forceps are used to dismember the baby and remove her from her mother's womb, piece by piece, limb by little limb. The alternative procedure is to pull the baby out legs first, and then crush the baby's skull in order to remove the dead baby in one piece. Late-term pregnancy is not a disease, and the abortion of a viable baby is not health care. My baby in my belly is 7.5 months old now. My pregnancy app tells me that she is dreaming. If she were to be born today, she would live with the help of our world-class healthcare providers here in Maryland. She is being talked to by her brothers and sisters every day. She is given cuddles and responds with kicks and somersaults that delight everyone. She responds to all sorts of stimulus in her environment. She even has happy food dances when I eat rainbow sherbet. I support women's rights. I support the reproductive rights to prevent or continue a pregnancy for all of Maryland's women. When it comes to ending a pregnancy after 24 weeks, after 6 months of pregnancy and growth, this is no longer an issue about women's rights. This is an issue about human rights and life and death. The life of the viable human baby being murdered needs thoughtful consideration by this body before enshrining it into the Maryland Constitution for generations to come. I ask you all, from the bottom of my heart, to vote green on this amendment so that we can do our jobs and protect late-term, viable Maryland babies. Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the maker of the amendment for sharing the amendment with me in advance as well. This is obviously a very difficult conversation to be having, but I just want to make sure that the body is aware, as I ask you to resist this amendment, as the HGO committee has resisted bills like this 16 times in the last 10 years. We need to look at what the current Maryland law is and how we interpret viability. Under current Maryland law, and this is, again, the system that works, that the voters overwhelmingly supported, only healthcare practitioners, not legislators, make clinical determinations about viability and other aspects of pregnancy. The reason for this is that every pregnancy is different, and while I wish my good colleague only the healthiest and happiest pregnancy, we have to recognize that pregnancies come in all varieties, and one-size-fits-all laws do not work in healthcare. That's why we have rejected bills like this many times in the past, because it should be healthcare clinicians making these determinations. This has been an emotional debate, and I really don't want to dig into the personal stories that the HGO committee has heard over and over again from people who were in need of care later in pregnancy for various reasons, but I assure you they are heartfelt and gut-wrenching. But I will remind the body, if you are not aware, a couple of years ago there was a national referendum in Ireland. I'm an Irish American. They had an abortion law prior to 2018 that was similar to what is being proposed. And an Indian doctor who was working in Ireland and living in Ireland died as a result of this law. And so the people of Ireland overwhelmingly supported the repeal of this law. And I would again urge this body respectfully to resist this amendment. Thank you so much.
Recognizing the gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks to the body for being so thoughtful with your words today. We really appreciate going back and forth on this really deep issue. I just want to echo some of the concerns that my colleague from Anne Arundel shared. I was one of those women that had a baby with a severe birth defect. I was offered, in the state of Maryland, a late-term abortion. I declined because while my baby did have a birth defect and was ultimately stillborn at term, my baby's life still mattered. My baby had a chance to survive. It would have needed surgeries and a long time in a NICU. There are a lot of women every day in the state of Maryland who are being told when they go to their doctors and have a baby with the same birth defect that my baby had, that they should abort this baby. I was offered it several times. And on delivery of my baby, I asked the nurses, how many babies like this do you see? And she candidly told me, well, very few at the stage that you're at, but I see them every single day in my other job. And I said, what's your other job? She works in an abortion clinic. We don't even know how many babies in the state of Maryland have the birth defect that my son had, because we don't track it, and because the women are receiving undue pressure in one of the hardest times, the hardest decisions they could ever make, to abort this baby because it is defective. So I fully support this amendment, and I wish that the body would consider legislation further that would help support women who want their babies but who are being told by society that their babies' lives don't matter and that their babies are defective. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for sharing her story. I would just like to remind the body that this legislation before us, without the amendment, ensures that everybody maintains the right to make their own personal choice in their own circumstance. And so I am truly grateful that the delegate was able to make the choice that was right for her, and without this amendment, everyone will be able to make the choice that is right for them. The second point I would just like to make, and then I will stop talking, but I think it needs to be made, is that this bill, without this amendment, does actually, for those of you who are concerned with abortion care being received later in pregnancy, the best thing we can do to reduce abortion happening later in pregnancy is increase access to care. We are removing financial barriers to care. We are increasing the number of providers available to people in their own community. This will allow people to access the care that they have decided to get quickly, as soon as possible, without unnecessary barriers. So I, again, urge the body to resist this amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Recognizing the gentleman from Federal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is 813820.
Amendment number 1.
Can I read the amendment, Madam Speaker?
So much be considered.
So much be considered.
The reading of the amendment.
The reading of the amendment. I apologize. Thank you. You'd think I'd have it by now.
So ordered.
This amendment's very simple. It strikes the qualified providers and substitutes physicians, and I'll explain. So on page 5, line 28 through page 6, line 1 of the bill, I was somewhat startled to see that a qualified provider, and I'll just read it out for everybody's edification here, means a physician, nurse practitioner, nurse midwife, licensed certified midwife, physician assistant, or any other individual. That's concerning. And the reason that's concerning is that, according to Johns Hopkins University, which actually provides abortion services to our citizens, it's also the largest employer in our state, there's typically 2 types of abortions. There's medical and surgical. Obviously, the surgical was alluded to earlier, but under the medical procedure, it says having a medical abortion is a major decision with emotional and psychological consequences. If you're considering this procedure, make sure you understand what it entails, side effects, possible risks, complications, and alternatives. And so the question I have, and really the precipitous for this amendment, is that who better to answer those questions than a physician? It was mentioned earlier that this is a major life decision. It deals with public health. I realize that there's nurse practitioners and other individuals that may otherwise be qualified, but this legislation seems to be opening it up to a whole bunch of new individuals, and that's very concerning. This amendment's very simple. It just states that in this moment, a physician needs to be there so they can answer the tough questions that a mother, whether it's a young mother, an old mother, somebody that has some concerns, can get those questions answered at this important moment. So with that, Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you again to the delegate for sharing this amendment with us in advance. I'm going to urge the body to resist this amendment. This is really striking at the core of this bill. As I mentioned previously, Our goal is to increase access to care. I want to remind the body that this legislation, without this amendment, is supported by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And I just want to read to you from their letter so that you can all feel confident that what we are proposing in the state of Maryland, which is already done by 14 other states, is very good clinical practice and in the best interest of public health. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists say that abortion is one of the safest medical procedures performed in the United States, safer than other routine medical procedures and substantially safer than childbirth. We heard that over and over again in our hearings. Please keep that in mind. The biggest threats, they say, to the quality of abortion care in the United States are unnecessary and burdensome government regulations. This legislation, without this amendment, intends to lift those. Patient care should never be legislated on false or inaccurate premises. And then they go on to say, and this again is at the heart of this legislation, that physician-only laws exacerbate health inequalities for people who already face the most barriers to abortion care. People of color, those living in rural areas, those with low incomes. So I urge the body to resist this amendment. Thank you.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I learned a little bit in law school, undue burden, some of these terms. But how could you argue against, in a medical procedure or a surgical procedure, that a physician shouldn't participate in that? I mean, if the goal is the care, and if the argument is the goal is the care of the mother, why would we not want the most highly qualified individuals participating in that situation? I don't know.
You want her to answer the question?
Yes, let me do, this is part B, and then I'll get there. What the bill doesn't make clear is who are these other individuals? If you could maybe allude to that. Thank you.
Thank you very
Floor
much.
leader.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker.
That's okay.
Thank you very much for that question, and I can provide some clarity to that specific question because you're referring to the language in the bill that says other providers. I want the body to understand that this legislation does not have other providers contemplated. What we're trying to do with that language is ensure, as I have mentioned to many of you before, we have not been on the House floor for 30 years with abortion-related legislation because it is very difficult and painful for us. We want to make sure our statute has the flexibility necessary should other new categories of providers who have abortion care within their scope of practice be established. For example, it was just last year that we created the licensed certified midwife category. This language in this bill does not mean that we wouldn't have to approve through statute new providers. If we are creating a new provider, there would be another piece of legislation that would approve that new provider. We just don't want to have to open up this section of statute again, so that's why we have that language in there that way.
So it's
Maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So it's evidently clear that you've intentionally left that vague, so that at a different point you can add additional individuals that can provide abortion services in the state. I mean, that's essentially what you just said. So that's why I put the amendment in, so that at the end of the day it stops with the physician, so that we're not including other individuals such as Joe the plumber, that can start providing abortion services in the state. So with that, Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Floor leader.
Just to clarify, so I chair health occupations. I live in and breathe this stuff, fortunately or unfortunately. But I want to make sure that it's clear to the body that we define the scope of practice in the statute. So we're not leaving it vague intentionally in order to sneak something past people at all. Should there be a new provider group that includes this in their scope of practice, that would be legislatively determined. I urge the body to resist this amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose?
Roll call.
Madam Speaker?
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title, the gentleman from Western Maryland?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 833427/1.
Amendment number 1.
Be so much the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
In establishing an abortion care clinic training program, I believe that it would be proper to provide both sides of the issue. This bill currently provides for the aborted and mother, but what about the mother and father who chooses life? This would be an equity in the training program amendment. This amendment will, under the insurance provisions of the bill, give pregnancy, birth, and postnatal care partnered with abortion care in terms of deductible, coinsurance, copayment, and other cost-sharing requirements, and would provide the equivalent subsidies under the exchange. Now, as a father of 9, my wife and I've had 8 who have lived, and 1 that has passed, I urge the committee to accept this amendment of fairness. If we as a state are going to pass HB 937, we should pass the same insurance requirements for those choosing to love the child. Madam Speaker, I move the amendment.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the delegate both for sharing the amendment with me and for this idea. I think that we discussed this a little bit in our voting session as well. It's a really great idea. I see where you're coming from. I understand the goal you are trying to accomplish. I would love to partner with you and anybody else in accomplishing that goal. It's the right thing to do. That being said, I will urge the body to resist this amendment for now and work with us to make this happen. There are a couple of technical problems that make, well, I wouldn't call them technical. They're pretty substantial challenges that mean that we can't do this right now. But again, you're right. It's the right thing to do. We should have no co-insurance, no co-pays, no cost for labor and delivery. The little bit of legislative history here, we used to have that in the small group market. When we transitioned through the Affordable Care Act to the essential health benefits and labor and delivery became part of the essential health benefits, we ended up having labor and delivery care for everything, but it does have some copay and co-insurance, and it varies widely across plans. Many plans do have no cost sharing at all for labor and delivery, and some do not. So it's very complicated, and of course, while many of us in this chamber, I think, have had our children at home, not myself, but many others, most babies are born in the hospital, which require a lot of extra costs, and those hospital rates can't be negotiated as easily. So I'm going on and on because I think your idea is great. You can tell I'm excited about it. I think it's the right thing to do. We can't do it right now with this amendment, but I know you have a great track record of working on hard issues and doing the right thing for healthcare, and I would love to work with you on that in the future. But for now, I urge the body to resist this amendment for the reasons I stated.
Gentleman from Talbot.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm rising in support of the amendment. We've got a fantastic organization in our district, Choices Pregnancy Center. It's an organization we support in blood, sweat, and tears, and financially. It's a fantastic entity, and it has ties throughout the community. They would benefit tremendously from the support of this amendment, their mission, and the lives that they've affected. So I'd urge all the members to support and to vote in support of this amendment. I urge it and thank the sponsor for bringing it.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just again urge the body to resist this amendment. Let me be clear, while the intents are extraordinary, there is a lot of complication involved in doing it this way as it is proposed. What we need to do is get together with all of the stakeholders, evaluate everything that's going on in all of the different plans, talk to the small group market plans who previously had this type of requirement, and figure out what the actual costs would be, if it is manageable, how it is manageable, what the impact is going to be on premiums. This is complicated stuff. It is not as simple as what is happening in this original bill. So I urge the body to resist the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Gentleman from Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment 713423.
Amendment number 1.
Madam Speaker,
So much be considered.
Thank you. Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as we were having debate, I received a text message from someone that said that our third Lieutenant Governor of Maryland is taking his last breaths, potentially this very moment. He was the Democrat, pro-life Lieutenant Governor, Sam Bogley. And his family asked that I dedicate my short discussion today on this amendment to him, and I do so in his honor, because as we might remember, as a proud Democrat, person who stood for the least among us, he fought for the rights of the unborn. And that's why I rise today, because one of the things that impacted me in college was a young lady named Gianna Jessen. Gianna Jessen was born after a saline abortion, became a very articulate, beautiful spokesperson for life, and she still carries that vision and message on. And it impacted me greatly as a college student, because I realized that no matter what side of the debate that you might be on, the one thing that we can all agree on is that someone that is born alive has the due process protections of our Constitution and should be immediately rendered care. And amazingly, Gianna Jessen's story was such that she was denied care, and it was through a miracle. I think it was a nurse, if I recall the story, that saved her life. So this is a simple amendment. It's a basic amendment. It's an amendment that says that if a child is born alive after an abortion is performed or attempted, a health care practitioner who is present for the abortion shall simply, in caring for the child, exercise the same degree of care as would be provided to any other child of the same gestational age. And if the child is born in a non-hospital setting, transfer the child to a hospital. Now, I recently had the privilege of having a baby boy. My wife and I were very blessed a little more than 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that amazed me is that when our little guy was put on my wife's care and on her chest at the moment of birth, the thing that struck me was his eyes opened and locked onto her eyes. And I was all goo-goo-eyed about that, and I took a picture and all that. But then I broke down, because then he reached out his little hand and grabbed her face. And I realized, this is a life. This is a person. And that's what this bill does. It protects those little lives. That's what this amendment does. For those that survive, those little babies that survive, when they're reaching out to us right here in this chamber, their little hands are reaching to your heart. This is something we can come together on. The Fifth Amendment of the Constitution gives that due process. It says that no person shall be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. It goes on to say that nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Let's at least give the unborn due process today, after they're born. And I would move the amendment. Thank you.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would urge the body to resist this amendment. I want to make sure you know that the medical community is universally opposed to bills like this. Numerous healthcare organizations representing thousands of clinicians oppose these bills. These bills we've obviously seen introduced across the country, and in this form it is an amendment, but the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American College of Nurse Midwives, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine oppose this type of bill, in large part because they duplicate existing rules and requirements for clinicians, and they perpetuate myths that these types of things actually happen. So I would urge the body to resist the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments
Madam
to the bill
Speaker.
to this title? Recognizing the gentleman from Washington County.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. It's amendment number 483526/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Amendment number 1 changes the purpose paragraph. Amendment number 2 removes the $3.5 million mandated funding provisions of the bill and replaces it with the checkoff option on the Maryland state income tax return, where individual taxpayers can voluntarily contribute to the training program fund. I propose the amendment for 2 reasons. 1, many of you are familiar with the letters being issued by the Maryland Department of Budget and Management, which state, changes to the Maryland Constitution in 2020 provide the General Assembly with additional budgetary authority beginning in the 2023 legislative session to realign total spending by increasing and adding items to the appropriations in the budget submitted by the governor. The legislature's new budgetary power diminishes, if not negates, the need for mandated appropriation bills. So there's no need to any longer mandate spending programs for which the legislature prioritizes. Next legislative session, the legislature has the authority to simply move the funding to the programs they deem most important. 2, I need not tell this body that abortion is a highly divisive issue, as we've witnessed today. Why should I, as a taxpayer, be forced to fund pro-abortion initiatives when it goes against my very beliefs regarding the sanctity of life? This amendment resolves that issue by making the funding a voluntary program amongst the taxpayers of Maryland and removes the conflict between pro-life and pro-choice camps. For these reasons, I move the amendment. Thank you.
Recognizing the chair appropriations.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Welcome to next year. But it's not next year. So what the author of this amendment does is try to project what maybe we can do next year, provided the House doesn't set rules around that. But furthermore, I just want to say to this amendment, I'm going to ask you to vote against it for the most obvious reason. Why would we leave women's health care and access for women in the healthcare setting to a checkoff on your income tax form? Really? That's what we think of women's health care? No. I ask you to reject this amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor,
Madam Speaker,
gentlemen, make
if I may
the motion.
respond, I guess there are some of us that don't consider abortion as necessarily women's health care, as we've heard today, that we do consider those initiatives that promote life as being health care. So the checkoff programs in Maryland have been highly successful, reinforced by the fact that we continually add them to the income tax forms. So for that reason, I press the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose? Is gentleman supported?
Roll call.
Madam Speaker?
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there additional amendments to the bill to its title? Recognizing the gentlelady from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. The amendment number is, I don't want to mess it up, 553924/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much to be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Body, this amendment is very simple. It prohibits abortion based on the gender of the baby. This has become an increasingly serious problem since the advent of sonograms, particularly in cultures, countries, and communities where male children are prized over females. A recent study from the Canadian Medical Association Journal was published that talked about the consequences of allowing gender-based abortions. Some communities around the world have a male to female ratio of births. Out of every 100 females born, there's 130 males born. This has been labeled as missing women. We are coming up on the 50th year anniversary of the Women's Caucus in Maryland. Congratulations to us. And we're blessed right now to be in a country where women are making strides every single day to be treated as equal and fair. And we had a long, long, hard road to go. But we don't know where we're going to be culturally or socially in the next 50 years. And we're making some very big policy decisions right now. So, body, my amendment simply asks that if a provider knows that someone is considering an abortion based solely on gender, that they be denied that. Because the people who are the real victims of policies like that are women. So, Madam Speaker, I would press my amendment and ask for this body to protect the tiny, beautiful women that are going to be born over the next 50 or 100 years in the state of Maryland.
Floor leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for sharing this amendment in advance, and for your leadership in the Women's Caucus, which I do appreciate. I understand this is a well-intentioned amendment, but I do have to urge the body to resist it. A little bit of context. There have been a lot of single-issue type bans introduced around the country, and their purpose is really to undermine the right to choose and to cast blame and suspicion on pregnant women and interfere with their private decisions. Women do not win when we take away their fundamental rights. And as the member mentioned, son preference can be a real issue internationally, but there's absolutely no evidence of this an issue in Maryland. And I would further point out that sex selection bans in specific are both fundamentally unenforceable and they target the Asian American Pacific Islander community, particularly immigrants, for suspicion. We cannot support this amendment. I urge the body to resist it. However, I will say that there is broad international consensus that the most effective way to combat sex selection is to implement policies that promote gender equity. There is a lot of things we can do in this body today to promote gender equity. We are, in a bipartisan way, doing some amazing things with childcare. I'm very hopeful that we will be able to move forward with paid family and medical leave. These are the kinds of policies that will end sex-based discrimination. So we need to move forward with that and resist this amendment. Thank you.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to the floor leader on this. I would just touch on one comment about the lack of data around this happening in Maryland. I think it's because we don't actually collect the data. So, Madam Speaker, I would move my amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker?
Is everyone recorded to vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails.
Madam Speaker.
Gentlemen from Baltimore and Harford counties.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know it's been a long day for many of us. And
Everybody here.
I'm here for this and just this today. So I have an amendment at the desk, number 313123/1.
Amendment number 1.
So much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Madam Speaker, we have spoken very much about the process coming up to the abortion here today. I wish what we were speaking about, I wish that title up there said Adoption Care Access, because that would be better for everyone concerned, everyone. But that is not what we have. And I'm not happy with what we have because it's not in my belief system. So what this amendment does, it takes the final part of this process. After these children have been aborted, they will be given over to a Christian organization or to a religious organization for a proper religious burial. And that no body part or no blood or no tissue can be sold for any purpose. These are human lives. They are not to be dealt out for the purpose of profit, the purpose of being someone's enrichment. What we're talking about here is that I believe in eternal life, and I believe we should have the right to a proper burial. And it doesn't matter what religion you belong to, because believe me, with an amendment like this, there'll be no shortage of people stepping forward to make sure that these innocent children are properly buried, because they do have a life. They do have a life. They have a life because our Father said, I knew you before you were in your mother's womb. You know, probably the most difficult issue for people like myself to lose on is this one. The Roman soldier looked up and said, truly, this is an innocent man. What aborted fetus is not an innocent child? Tell me one. This amendment is about dignity for life. Dignity for life when it's alive, dignity for life after it's gone. Let's pass this amendment and give these children the proper respect and give our born children the ability to see that we do respect life. It does have a value. All life has a value. I know every one of you here have seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And George is ready to jump off the bridge to commit suicide. Before he does, he prays and says, I wish I was never born. He didn't say, I wish I was never created. He said, I wish I was never born. That's an abortion, never being born, or a miscarriage. And then Clarence, the angel, says, I jumped off the bridge to save you. And he's, no, no. And then he brings him to the very beginning of his life. Not if he would have committed suicide, but what his life would have been like had he not been born. And the very first thing, his brother, who was a war hero, would have died. And all the men on that ship would have died. Mr. Gower would have gave that poison prescription and destroyed his life. The entire movie is about how one life has value to it. Let's show these children the respect they deserve with a good religious burial. They've been abandoned by those who care for them. But by us who do care for them, we have not abandoned them. We want the opportunity to make sure that they have a good religious burial. And that doesn't matter what denomination you are or what religion you're affiliated with. We're at the end of this. This is no longer talking about all we talked about. This is, let's do the right thing going forward. This doesn't change or cost this bill anything. There is no fiscal note with this. This is just about doing the right thing. Madam Speaker,
Floor
thank
leader.
you for the respect that you've shown us during this.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would urge the body to resist this amendment. It imposes a religious burial on families regardless of their personal beliefs. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, and I'll just say once again what I said earlier. These are abandoned. These are abandoned children. It doesn't matter what their families thought. What their families thought is they didn't deserve life for one reason or other. We, as a society, a civilized society, even the Romans turned the bodies over of the crucified and the martyrs. Even they showed that respect. And that's all this amendment does. Show the respect of these infants that they have a right to eternal life.
On the amendment, all in
Madam Speaker.
favor signify by
Madam Speaker.
saying aye.
Madam Speaker.
Opposed?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman of Baltimore County to explain his vote.
No, I wasn't trying to explain my vote, actually, Madam Speaker. I had a question, but I know it's too late. My question would have been, what are we currently doing with the remains of fetal tissues? And I really hope we're not selling them. I don't know the answer, but that's pretty sickening if it is, in fact, the case. But thank you.
Clerk will call the roll. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third reading. Special order calendar number 29. Clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 1171, Declaration of Rights, Right to Reproductive Liberty. Favorable report adopted.
Who is it? The maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk. It's amendment number 393820/1.
Amendment number 1.
Move so much be considered the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
This amendment alters the language of Article 48, Declaration of Rights, to read as follows: that every person, including the preborn, as a central component of the individual's right to liberty and equality, has the fundamental right to life and reproductive liberty. The state may not, directly or indirectly, deny, burden, or abridge the right unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Why, you might ask, is there a need to alter the language? Science tells us that a female human being is female at the time of her fertilization. The baby girl has 46 chromosomes, 23 from each parent. The mother contributes the X chromosome. The father contributes either the X or the Y chromosome. Consequently, the baby girl will have the XX chromosome at fertilization, and the baby boy will have the XY chromosome at fertilization. Subsequently, in 3 weeks, the baby's blood vessels and sex cells form. Foundations of the brain, spinal cord, and nervous system are laid. In 5 weeks, arms and legs and facial features appear. The blood is separate from the mother's. At 6 weeks, toes and fingers develop, and both the reproductive organs as well as the heartbeat become first detectable. Let me repeat, at 6 weeks, the reproductive organs are first detectable. By week 12, a girl's uterus and ovaries are evident, and by week 22, ovaries are completely formed and contain an estimated 6 million eggs. House Bill 1171, as originally written, chooses winners and losers. The bill chooses the reproductive rights of the mother over the reproductive rights of the preborn child. House Bill 1171, as written, allows for the destruction of the life of the preborn child and forever takes away the preborn child's own right to reproduction, a capability in which that preborn child, by week 22, is equipped with a fully developed reproductive system, complete with 6 to 7 million eggs. For these reasons, I move the amendment.
Floor Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would urge the body to resist this amendment. As I've mentioned before, the voters had a say in this, and the right to abortion care has been settled law since 1991 and the following referendum. I urge the body to resist the amendment.
Maker of the amendment.
House Bill 1171 reminds me of lyrics in a song by Neil Young. The song is Rocking in the Free World, and the lyrics state, I see a woman in the night with a baby in her hand. There's an old street light near a garbage can, and now she put the kid away and she's going to get a hit. She hates her life and what she's done to it. There's one more kid that'll never go to school, never get to fall in love, never get to be cool. I do not offer this amendment lightly, but this is an issue where religion and science both agree. We heard earlier that God spoke to the prophet Jeremiah with the following words, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. God has a plan for each of our lives, for each of the preborn child's life. Let's offer hope to our constituency, not despair. Let's work together in a bipartisan manner to investigate the reasons why a mother chooses to end the life of her preborn child, and let's fix it. I press the amendment.
On the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Oppose?
Roll call, Madam Speaker.
Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional amendments to the bill as to its title? Hearing none, the bill is ordered printed for third. Quorum call.
Madam Speaker.
Clerk will take the call. There being 129 members present, the House is still in session. Calendar of third reading, House Bills number 20. Clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 210, Criminal Trial, Spousal Privilege Exception.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will take the call.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone fixed their vote? Does anyone care to change your vote? Clerk will take the call. There being 131 members present, the bill passes. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 382, Somerset County local officials' salaries and daily allowance for traveling expenses.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? Not, the clerk will take the call.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded the vote? Does anyone care to change your vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 130 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 382, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 396, Montgomery County Planning Board, open meetings, video and audio streaming and minutes.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded the vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 134 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 396, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 397, Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, Montgomery County, County Council and District Council voting thresholds.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 397, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 546, pedestrians, Kent Island Drawbridge, fishing prohibition.
It's on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 546, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 620, Caroline County State's Attorney and Sheriff salaries.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not,
Madam Speaker?
yes, recognize the gentlelady from Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question for the leader on this bill.
Question?
Yes. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question. He's not sitting next to him. I have a question for the sponsor of this bill. Not the floor lead.
The sponsor of the bill is over there. Gentleman from Caroline.
Good afternoon or evening. I don't know where we are anymore. Why is there a need for, what's going on? Can you tell us what this bill is going to do?
Well, this is one of those positions where they can't have pay increases during their terms. So they're the end of their terms the same as ours. It's during an election.
So how much is the increase going to be?
That's actually a good question. It's going to take me a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm fine. We'll wait. So.
Unfortunately, DLS didn't prepare me for any questions.
Okay. And it's the state's attorney and the sheriff of Caroline County.
Well, let me look at the fiscal note. It might be in there. Well, let me first, before I can answer that question,
Speaker.
to
Will the
fill in some...
Recognizing the gentlelady from Rules.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I have here in the floor report that the state's attorney's salary is $129,066, and the current salary of the sheriff is $103,253.
Thank you, Floor Leader. I appreciate that. And for the sponsor of the bill, your state's attorney and your sheriff are asking for an increase that's typical, that they need every 4 years from this body?
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
Okay, great. And do you have any idea how many state's attorneys are in the Caroline County office?
There's one.
There's just one, but like assistant state's
I believe
attorneys?
there's a state's attorney for every county.
No, I know that. I know that. I mean, how many staff state's attorneys are in the Caroline County office?
Not a clue.
You have an idea. Okay, very interesting.
Maybe 4 or 5, 6, something like that. It's a small staff.
Okay, because that state's attorney is in front of the General Assembly a lot, so I figured the salary was probably pretty good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Caroline.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to add that this does not come out of the state coffers at all. This is entirely paid for by the local governing body.
Is there any further debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, clerk will take the call. There being 128 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 620, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 885, Howard County Sheriff Salary.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 129 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 885, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Calendar of third reading, House Bills number 21. The clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 322, Courts, Judgments, Exemptions from Execution.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded the vote? Does anyone care to change the vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 99 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 322, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill.
House Bill 400, Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission Hiring and Promotion Preferences, Veterans and Their Spouses.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 134 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 400, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 401, Prince George's County Cooperative Housing Corporations, Condominiums, and Homeowners Associations Reserve Studies.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 134 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 401, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 446, Baltimore County Disposition of Marriage Ceremony Fee.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 133 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 446, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 527, St. Mary's County Emergency Services Applicants Polygraph Examinations.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There being 134 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 527, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 817, Criminal Law, Violation of Protective Order, Merger Prohibition, and Separate Sentence Authorization.
Is on third reading and final passage. Is there any debate? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded the vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, clerk
Madam
will take
Speaker.
the call. Recognizing the gentlelady from Washington County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My fingers are moving too fast for the button on House Bill 322. I'd like to change my vote from a nay to a yay.
Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Same thing, House Bill 322 from nay to yay.
Gentleman from Frederick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House Bill 382 from nay to yay.
Okay.
Madam Speaker.
There being 134 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 817, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk, read the next bill. Gentlemen,
And the counter vote change on HB 8852, green.
all right. Introduction of House Bill during the last 35 days of session. Recognizing the sponsor. Gentleman from Baltimore County.
Madam Speaker, the constituent asked for this bill late, and by the time it got drafted, it was after the 55th day. So I request that it be allowed.
Shall the bill be introduced? Requires 94 votes. Clerk will call the roll.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Does anyone care to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. There will be 122 votes in the affirmative. The bill will be introduced. The clerk will read the bill on the committee assignment.
House Bill 1484, Delegate Jalisi, House Rules.
That ends the work at the desk. Thank you for the thoughtful debate and respect giving to your colleagues. This was a long day. We started out at 10 and it's almost 2 o'clock. So, committee announcements. Appropriations.
Thank you. Woo, thank you. The Appropriations Full Committee will not meet, but subcommittees will.
Judiciary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the House Judiciary Committee will meet for bill hearings at 3:30 p.m. We will be having a voting session after a subcommittee that's going to be happening after the bill hearings. So we will be going a while tonight. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Environment and Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Environment and Transportation Committee will continue public hearings at 2:15. We have 84 witnesses, people. 2:15.
Ways and Means.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Ways and Means Committee will resume public bill hearings at 2:30. Please pay attention to subcommittee meeting assignments from the subcommittee chairs.
Economic Matters.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House Economic Matters Committee will be meeting at 2:30 for public bill hearings. We have 50 witnesses, so please get yourself some food and be there.
Health and Government Operations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That committee will begin our hearings at 3 p.m. today.
Okay. All righty. Quorum called before adjournment.
Madam Speaker?
Has everyone recorded their presence? Do not leave yet. Clerk will take the call. There will be 130 members present. The House is still in session. Calling on the majority whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For those of you that may not have noticed, the panoramic pictures that we took here the other day are in the lounge for your review. Please make your selection, fill out the form, and be sure to give them to Marty in the Speaker's office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognizing the majority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stand adjourned until Thursday, March 10th at 10 a.m., Legislative Day, March 4th.